Dr. Leland Stillman studied biology and environmental health at Connecticut College and received his medical doctorate from the University of Virginia. He then trained in internal medicine at Maine Medical Center. He practiced as a hospitalist for 3 years following his residency training, and then he went on to found his own practice just before COVID. He has a long-standing interest in alternative medicine. I would argue it's not alternative medicine, but
whatever you want to call it.
The category for this podcast is alternative health, which really bothers me, but you have to pick one. Which is also funny because I don't only cover alternative health. I cover like anything from like Tartaria to near-death experiences. Anyway, point being,
flat Earth.
Yeah, I have covered that a number of times on my show.
I know.
And okay, let me finish your bio. And now focuses on functional and integrative medicine in his practice. And you can find more about Leland in the show notes. So, man, this has been a long time coming. We've been connected for a long time. You were on the board of Health Freedom for Humanity. Thank you for gracing us with your presence right before the organization, unfortunately, had to shut down due to these insurmountable circumstances that we were dealing with at that time. But
yes.
Thank you for being there, man. And thank you for being here.
It was great to be there. It was really fun. And yeah, I've looked forward to meeting you for a long time.
Yeah,
it's
man.
good to finally be here.
You're very tan. You look like you spend a lot of time in the sun.
I live in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I cut my teeth kind of on the internet as like the sun doctor.
Yeah, I know.
So it's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's very simple, right? The more sun you get, the lower your risk of death. And the less sun you get, the higher your risk of death. And the dermatologists have not, graciously afforded us the insight into how much sun like that benefit attenuates that. So I can't tell you if you need to and I tell people not to burn, but up to burning, I have no idea how much is optimal because they haven't given us that data. Yeah. So anyway, I just get plenty of sun because I live in Naples, Florida. It's kind of a crime to live in Florida and not get sun.
Yeah, that'd be horrible. And I'm sure there's people that don't get any sun living in Naples.
Sadly.
Yeah, or they're rubbing themselves with a bunch of toxic substances before they go in the sun. We'll get into that a little bit today too.
For sure.
Yeah. So where did you get your start as an MD? What made you want to go to medical school?
It's funny you phrase it that way because I truly never wanted to go to medical school. My mother tells this really funny story. We were growing up on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, and I was born at the same hospital as my father, as a matter of fact, New York Presbyterian Hospital. In 1988, right around the time they switched from like all thimerosal vaccines to other adjuvants, particularly aluminum. And my sister and I was a very healthy, happy baby. Then I got my first round of childhood immunizations and I became a very unhappy, very sick baby. And my mother describes then that I spent years on and off antibiotics and ended up with a lot of the bread and butter childhood illnesses that American kids deal with today. Frequent colds, flus, sore throats, allergies, chronic ear infections. It was awful. My sister, her eyes crossed. She wound up with a lot of the same problems, and she ended up requiring getting a sinus surgery at some point to drain, fluid out of her sinuses. And my mother was holding her in her lap after the procedure, and she's vomiting into an emesis basin. And my mother looks up at the surgeon as he comes out of the OR, and she says, "We fixed the problem, right? We don't ever have to do this again, right?" And he says, "Oh no, the holes will heal up again and we'll have to go back in and operate."
My goodness.
And at that moment, my mother said, "Well, this is clearly not for us. We need a better way." And she then proceeded to take us to every conceivable integrative, alternative, holistic, natural, functional medicine provider you could imagine. Everything from like dowsing to energy healing to channeling to like prayer, herbs, homeopathy, supplements, cupping and coining, chiropractic. We did it all. And that was my early life. Those are some of my earliest memories because my mother was intent. She was determined not to settle for the mediocrity that, the mainstream medical establishment told her was her and our doom. And in retrospect, I can see now that there were a lot of bad practitioners, a lot of bad practices along the way, a lot of all hat, no cattle, call them snake oil salesmen, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't really matter. And then I ended up at about 15, finding a mentor who was a naturopath, self-taught, and he said, you should go to medical school. And because I had just told him, well, I want to go to naturopath school. I want to be a naturopath. And he said, none of the naturopath schools in the United States are any good. Not going to pass judgment on that myself, but that was his opinion. You want to have the biggest, baddest license so that you can do whatever you want, so that you can cut out abscesses, sew up lacerations, perform brain surgery, run IVs, do anything. You can access any tool in the toolbox. That's an MD. And you're young, you have the drive, you have the intelligence, you can do it, and so you should do it. He also predicted, even then, this was, the early 2000s, he said, we are going to live in a country soon where a lot of the best therapeutics are basically behind closed doors, and only people who have that credential and that licensure are going to be able to access those therapeutics. And here we are in 2024, and that's exactly what's going on. And he said there's going to be a very, very, very small proportion of people who are going to control some of that access. And if you're not there to do it, then people are not going to be optimally served. So I said, okay. And I went to medical school and I hated it. I thought it was so dumb. I thought it was such a waste of money. It wasn't even just that the paradigm was flawed. It was that it was done so poorly. It was almost insulting for it to be 50 grand or plus a year at the University of Virginia, just so we're really clear. And it pains me to say that because I think I wanted to like it. And even in retrospect, I want to like it. But there was a very particularly memorable day where a professor posed a question to the class that was a multiple choice question. And one of the brighter students in the class explained to the professor why, based on how he'd worded the question, the right answer could not possibly be right. And the professor couldn't understand the logic of the multiple choice question. And he got really hung up on that. And I thought, wow, I'm paying 50 plus grand a year for people who can't even be bothered to write good multiple choice questions. And that really frustrated me. And I could see coming out of like tests, exams, experiences, I was like, you guys are just testing my ability to memorize and regurgitate information. And this is, Einstein said, education is not the memorization of facts, it is the training of the mind to think. And that quote has really stuck with me. It shapes a lot of my thinking actually about treating patients, because I don't really look at treating patients as, you're a car, I put you up on the jack and I fix you. It's, you're a independent, sovereign human being. I'm going to teach you the rules of the game as I understand them based on my experience. And you're going to apply those rules to your context. And you get to apply them for the rest of your life to get the best results that you want and that you demand or you bargain for, you choose, right? And that's what I do. And so anyway, so I hated med school, went through with it, didn't even know I had to do a residency, had to do a residency afterwards. So that residency is 3 to 7 years. I did 3 years of internal medicine residency. And I really tried and wanted to go into academic medicine because I love learning and knowledge. And I actually hated business and sales and marketing. And to be honest, I actually was just I really didn't understand. I was really confused by people. I saw people as making really weird, illogical, irrational decisions. And I just couldn't understand why people would do that. And so I gravitated towards internal medicine because it's very much understanding, well, what is going on in the biochemical pathways and the pathophysiology. And it's actually the sickest patients and the highest level of acuity in the hospital in many ways.
How many, real quick question on that. How much of what modern internal medicine teaches, though, is totally fallacious and not rooted in any provable science, or at the least missing major components? Because like you're talking about, for example, biochemical pathways, and obviously that is a component, but as you well know now, being someone who understands that we have a biofield, that we have like electrosensitivity, that there are so many other factors at play here, even just about who we are as human beings, other than biochemical, to only focus on that absent of the other ones without this holistic context of who we are is can lead down a slippery slope, let's say.
So this reminds me of a passage from Tom Cowan's book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. His work is some of the best work, period, out there.
Also interesting, by the way, I don't mean to interrupt. As you're talking about, because I didn't know that about you, that you went into medical school already with the understanding that modern medicine has so many flaws and is rooted in really unproven stuff. Same with Dr. Cowan, by the way.
Yeah, I know. And I was fascinated.
And you're two of the only people I know who, what's interesting.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Me too. Very, very few people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in fact, it's funny, when I started at UVA, I looked up the homeopath my mother had taken me to as a child who lived in Charlottesville. His name was George Guess. I don't know if he's still in practice. He may actually have passed, because that was 14 years ago now, which makes me feel really old.
How old are you?
I'm 36.
You're not old at all. You're 4 years older than me. You're young.
Yeah. So I looked him up and I went out to coffee with him, and we talked about life and medicine and medical school. He'd been my doctor 15 years before that. And he said, "You're the only person I've ever talked to who planned on going to medical school who had this perspective." And I'll never forget how often my mentor said this to me. He said, the naturopath I alluded to, who I later had a falling out with because I really thought that all of his therapeutics were very half-baked, and like he was just, I really think he may have had narcissistic personality disorder, but that's a whole nother story. So, but he said, you're not going to have the perspective of what works until you've gone through it. And you just have to go through it and do your best and deal with it. And I had there was a lot of, how do I really feel about this in residency and medical school? Like, for example, in the hospital, they used to do things like they would automatically enter vaccines in under your prescription as a doctor. It was just it was on autopilot in the electronic health record. So I think I probably dispensed tons and tons and tons of vaccines. I got the flu shot every year until like right before COVID because I didn't know any better. And that's an example of like, I wasn't sure what was going to work. My mentor never said, well, you've got to avoid the flu vaccine. He just kind of said, well, you'll figure it out and you'll get through it. You'll detoxify your body and whatever. I'm not sure how good advice that was in retrospect, but I got away with it and here we are. But he said, you're going to figure out along the way what works and what doesn't work. And you're just going to have to think critically, essentially. And then, you'll get out there. And he also said to me, he said, it's what you learn after you think you know everything that really matters. So
what was the quote from Dr. Cowan that you were going to share in Human?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So
that was my bad. I interrupted you.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It starts with the concept, the map is not the territory. So in his book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, he goes through all the evidence that debunks the conventional view, mainstream view of the heart disease, heart function. And I think it's actually very important that people read that book because there's so much wisdom in it and there's so much perspective. It's easily in my top 10 books about health and wellness of all time. And he shares how all the conventional remedies for heart disease that have been found to be efficacious can work through biochemical pathways that their inventors, founders, and investigators don't even understand in order to achieve the same end. And I run into this a lot in the integrative space. People have a story about how their therapeutic modality works, and it's total nonsense when you actually deconstruct it. And then people are like, oh, well, then it's just placebo. Excuse me. No, what you're saying is because their story is not true, this therapeutic doesn't have value. That's not true at all. In the end, your hypothesis is, does this work? Does this have therapeutic value for people? Like, I'll give you a great example. These are LifeWave patches. You've interviewed people about LifeWave. I love the product. I have a whole team of LifeWave called Team Quantum Wellness. And people will come back to me and they'll say, well, I tried the product, it didn't work for me. So therefore it doesn't work. In medicine, we have a really important concept called number needed to treat. And it's a really important concept because it's the number of people you have to treat with any given modality in order to achieve a given clinical outcome. Let's say that you've got fatigue. You take 100 people who say, I'm tired. First of all, what does that mean? Does that mean like you need an afternoon nap? We might consider that to be totally normal physiology. Think about warm, hot places. There's a siesta in the middle of the afternoon.
Right.
No one is like, oh, you have siesta-itis. You need to take ADHD every day at 1 o'clock with a cup of coffee sorry, I said ADHD, I meant Ritalin at 1 o'clock to cure your siesta-itis. And you got to do it every day for the rest of your life, right? So people create these narratives of you have this disease when in fact you have a normal physiologic response.
Right.
But anyway, what were we talking about?
We're talking about what you've learned or what internal medicine gets wrong.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to go into internal medicine.
Yeah, I was talking about number needed to treat. So when you look at number needed to treat, you have to think about, okay, it didn't work for you, didn't work for this person, didn't work for that person, didn't work for that other person. But the fifth person, it changed their life. Mm. And on a statistical level, number needed to treat winds up being like, you got to give this many people aspirin to prevent this many heart attacks. And people are floored by the numbers on things like that. Like the number needed to treat for aspirin, depending on the study you look at, you have to treat like 100 and something people who've had a heart attack with a baby aspirin a day for like 5 years in order to prevent one more heart attack. Mm-hmm. That's shocking.
Yeah.
Imagine if you said, we have to pack 150 parachutes 5 times over 5 years for one person not to fall to their death when they get out of an airplane. Mm-hmm. People would be like, wow, parachutes are terrible. Mm-hmm. They're bunk. Why would I spend money on parachutes? But people go out and they buy aspirin every single day.
Right.
And I could use an endless number of examples. But people make this mistake of thinking, well, like I tried LifeWave patches, they didn't work for me. Therefore, they don't work. They didn't work for you. But I've seen transformational results.
Right.
And then it's just a matter of, do you want to take the time and do the work of figuring out who does it work for? How often does it work? Why does it work? And all the rest of it. So anyway, a lot of what we get taught, no matter what it is, internal medicine, naturopathic, they're giving you a map. And the map describes some aspect of the territory. And the story they're telling you about how to get from A to B works to get you from A to B. But it doesn't work for the reason that they think it works.
Right.
And that's it. That's fine. And people get really uncomfortable about that because people tend to be addicted to being right. And they tend to have a huge problem with uncertainty.
Right.
And, at a certain point, I realized if you really want to be good at anything, you have to get really, really comfortable with, and the analogy I use is eating humble pie. And humble pie is something that people don't like to make. And they make it, and they put it in the fridge, and they put it in the back, and they look at it every day until it goes bad, and then they throw it out. And if I'm good at anything, it's because when patients didn't get better, I got curious instead of doing what most doctors do, which is ignoring them, not following up with them, gaslighting them, telling them, well, you just haven't done enough of what I told you to do because, subtext, you're a bad patient, or you don't have what it takes, or you don't care, or, you don't believe, or whatever story they make up. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is like what's wrong with medicine. People don't have this appreciation for the reality of uncertainty. They don't want to own up to their mistakes. They don't want to get curious instead of getting angry or guilty or shamed or sensitive or whatever. And they just get mired in doing the same thing over and over again and not ever getting better. And yeah.
Do you think it's largely because most MDs, DOs, and other experts, credentialed experts in the mainstream health system and allopathic medicine sort of take on an identity of that which they've learned, also with the assumption that what they have learned up to that point or been conditioned to believe, both in medical school and in residency, and what they're reading in medical journals, is what is sort of like objectively true, for lack of a better term. And because they form an identity around that, it's really hard for them to then turn the other way in the face of either when it comes to their patients not getting better, or in many ways getting worse, or that accompanied with conflicting information coming from elsewhere, coming from more independent sources.
I just think it's an endemic problem of human nature.
Mhm.
And there's one particularly compelling story that I'm reminded of when you ask me that, which is, you've heard of Ignaz Semmelweis. Ignaz Semmelweis?
Huh.
Really? You've
No.
never heard of Semmelweis?
Nope.
Okay. Short story, short version. Semmelweis was I think he was a Hungarian physician working in Austria. And he was studying what's called puerperal fever, which is basically sepsis in women after they've given birth. And what he discovered was that the women who gave birth when the doctors were delivering had much higher rates of puerperal sepsis and then death than the women who were delivered by midwives. And he asked the logical question, well, what are the doctors doing that the midwives don't do? And what the doctors were doing in between cases of laboring women was they would go dissect cadavers.
Oh, okay. I have heard this.
Right? And this is a big part of where germ theory comes from, right? And it's on I just started a podcast, by the way, and I am really interested in picking Tom Cowan and Andy Kaufman's brains on this, but I need to get them to agree to be guests first.
Yeah.
If you can help me with that,
I could probably help you with that.
That would be great.
You're good buddies of mine.
So anyway, he asked this question. He said, okay, well, we should probably wash our hands because something we're taking from our hands, from these bodies, into the laboring female patient is creating this problem.
Decaying flesh.
Sure. And his colleagues said, this can't possibly be real. You're totally crazy. And he ended up, the story is kind of like he was abducted and taken to a psychiatric facility and then killed. That's the sort of, maybe that's what happened. Maybe he did go crazy. Maybe he did get locked up. Maybe he did, add that to the list of really revolutionary thinkers who happen to then go crazy and then wind up dying.
Heard that a lot. Right.
Sure, it's just a big coincidence.
Right.
So, but it's not that story that's interesting to me. It's the story that, and I can't remember where I read this. I think it was like Great Feuds or Great Something in the History of Medicine. And that book was so eye-opening for me. I read it in residency, and it was about basically how much work it was or has been forever to change the thinking of the day. Nothing is old is new again. There's nothing new under the sun. William Harvey, who discovered the circulatory system and described how the heart functions in a mechanistic way.
Yeah.
I mean, not
you just
the
said
whole
Human
story.
Heart, Cosmic Heart is your favorite book too. That's what's fun.
But it's so funny because if you look back at his story is really funny too.
Yeah.
His problem with the Galilean notion of blood flow. Are you familiar with it?
Huh.
Their idea was that blood was created in the liver, and it then ascended to the heart. Or no, it was that the blood pumped heart to like the liver or something like that. And Harvey just said, hey, wait a minute. If blood is created in the liver or the heart, it's just created, then the heart would have to make like something like 66 ounces of blood a day if this is how many times it beats, and this is how much fluid's ejected from it each minute. And that's just not possible. There's no way the body makes this many units of blood a day.
Mm-hmm.
We don't eat that much food. Where would the matter come from? And that's not even, let's not talk about biological transmutation or whatever, because that's a whole nother thing.
Yep.
But anyway, so that Semmelweis advances this theory, it runs into all this opposition, but there was a Polish physician who took this story to heart and believed that Semmelweis was right, and he promptly went out and killed himself. Why? He couldn't deal with the guilt of having caused this in women. And so people need to remember doctors are people too, and the weight of having made a medical error is immense. I am so grateful that I have not made errors in my career that really meaningfully shorten someone's life or reduce their quality of life. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. And if you think you haven't made any mistakes, you probably just aren't aware of them. But I can't point to any case where I'm like, I missed a cancer. I missed something that could have been solved surgically. I referred someone out and it didn't, it was a mistake. It ended horribly, So I think people, there's like, it's a really hard thing to take errors that you've made and forgive yourself for them. That's really hard work. Mm-hmm. I've made a lot of mistakes, not with patients, but in terms of my clinical thinking. Like I went to work at clinics or for practices, or I used paradigms, and I stepped back from them after a while and said, wow, that wasn't what I thought it was.
Right.
And there's like a struggle with guilt and shame, like, wow, like I didn't give my patients the best. But you have to remember that you gave them what you thought was best. And that's the only thing that you can do. But still having that level of compassion for yourself, for most people, takes work.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of people grow up in an environment where they get the nurturing and the love and the coaching and the mentorship to understand that that's okay and they did their best and that's good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said.
Thanks.
Very well said. At what point did you want to sort of start your own practice? Like, what was it like a cumulative effect of taking, this is a guess here, I'd imagine this is largely correct. You grew up mostly with this sort of natural approach to health.
Mm-hmm.
You went to medical school. You were conditioned partly into that paradigm, but still having elements of your childhood.
Sure.
You tasted a little bit of it in internal medicine and as a hospitalist,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, yep, this is clearly not it. I'm going to take
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that I learned when I was younger, really start looking there, expand upon them, take some elements of allopathic medicine that are redeeming and start my own thing.
So my mentor originally told me, the naturopath said, you need to go do an allergy fellowship, an immunology fellowship, so you really understand the immune system, because that's the heart of a lot of the dysfunction that people are dealing with today. But then he and I had a big falling out late in residency, and I kind of started to question a lot of what he told me over the years, partly because I wound up in such a sort of unhappy place as a doctor.
Was this the mentor that kind
Same
of...
mentor. He was my mentor until my late 20s in residency when we had a falling out.
Okay.
And then we parted ways shortly after that, completely.
So this is the one that like even was...
Told me to go to med school.
Yeah, get the flu shot, like whatever, you'll detoxify it type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it.
So anyway, he said, go do this fellowship. So I was all set up to do that. I trained in medical school and did some papers with Dr. Thomas Platzmills. I write about him in my book, by the way. Yeah, great book.
Dying to Be Free by Leland Stillman. You can find it in the show notes.
Read the subtitle.
Okay, sorry. Dying to Be Free, How America's Ruling Class is Killing and Bankrupting Americans and What to Do About It. And you can find this in the show notes. There you go. Nice plug. And then you do the whole like, or do the smile thing and this, and then the wink. And then I'm going to have Nico, my editor, put like a little flash right here. Okay.
So I was all set up to do that. And then I was like, I'm going to spend my whole life in training. And when you come out of allergy immunology fellowship, first of all, their treatment paradigm is very dysfunctional. And you come out and the whole thing is based on like insurance still. And this mentor of mine, he just didn't have any grasp of like what it was like to actually practice medicine, let alone be a fellow in a fellowship program, let alone graduate from that and then go on to do things. So I just said, I can't trust what my mentors told me. You know, we've had a horrible falling out over something else. And I got to rethink this. Mm-hmm. And so I started to look around because I was deep in the history of all this, and I looked into allergy and immunology, and I found that the field of allergy and immunology had a schism in the 1960s around the work of a guy named Theron Randolph and a number of other great thinkers in that field at the time. And they actually started what was called the Society for Clinical Ecology, which is all about how the environment shapes human health. Theron Randolph was a professor at Northwestern, had very controversial views in the allergy immunology field. He said all these people are being poisoned by environmental toxicants. He described multiple chemical sensitivity. He said, we've got to clean up the environment. We've got to do very different allergy testing. We've got to think about allergy very differently. You know, yes, this person has a negative test, but when we feed them that food, they don't do well. And yes, I know that they don't have an immediate hypersensitivity reaction, but they have headaches, or they have fatigue, or they have this, or they have that. And the Society for Clinical Ecology and the American Academy of Allergy and Immunology then just took completely different tracks. And American Association of Allergy and Immunology, Quad AI, to this day is very conventional drugs, you know, no diet, no lifestyle changes. And the American Society for Clinical Ecology became the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. I started to look for physicians in that group who were doing interesting things. So I just went to their members page, and I just started looking. And I found a practice that will remain nameless. And I contacted them because they were doing IVs and they were treating mold and Lyme and this and that. And I said, this looks interesting. I have internal medicine training. I look at IV meds all day. Let's go. Let's see what this is. So I flew down there, interviewed, had my reservations about the practice from the get-go. But I said, I literally had patients in this practice begging me to come work there because they said, this work is so important. It's so impactful. This has changed our lives. We've had, incredible results. And I said, okay, yeah, definitely. And, the money was there to pay for my salary, so I didn't have to worry about money. So I moved down, bought a car, was ready to just start my career. And then like 2 months into working there, it became apparent to me that the psychological and emotional dynamics within the practice were very broken and that it was just going to be a nightmare. And so I had yet another falling out with yet another mentor who I really liked and really wanted to follow in the footsteps of, who was doing really inspiring clinical work. And I took from that experience a lot of information, knowledge, learning. And I also noticed something as I was transitioning out of that job, which was that there were a lot of long-term patients at that practice who did get better. And I was very curious about that. And one of them said, you need to look into light as medicine. And then I got deep into the light as medicine, quantum health, quantum wellness, fell down that rabbit hole for 2, 3, 4 years.
I presume Jack Kruse was your gateway into that?
Yeah.
Largely, yeah.
It was. But I have a lot of, I see people coming out of that world having heard things that he's said, and it really doesn't serve them well. And so I don't mention Jack ever because
I also think Jack can come across as an asshole, and that's me saying this. You don't have to comment on that, but that's my opinion.
People should really spend time learning what one of my favorite books that I recommend to patients very often is called Safe People. And another book, 2 books that I recommend to people strongly are Should I Stay or Should I Go? And Don't You Know Who I Am by Dr. Ramani Durvasula. And those books, and Boundaries by Cloud Townsend, I share those books with patients because I noticed in my own life that I was attracted to mentors who had a lot of I don't know how to say this without, making it into like an ad hominem attack on Jack indirectly. But I just noticed that there were a lot of psychological and emotional dynamics in the health and wellness space that weren't working for me. They weren't working for my patients. And those books are what I share with patients when I think that they have a psychological, emotional problem in their life and they need to get to the bottom of it so that they can get healing and resolution. And I say that with all due respect to Jack, because I also know Jack's transformed countless lives, showed people amazing healing.
Agree.
But I've also just seen some of the stuff he's said get taken by people in a way that winds up not serving them well. I'm going to explain how I got into looking into emotions, psychology later, because it does come up later and it really shaped my therapeutic approach. But I got into light, I got into quantum health. It kind of derailed my life. I ended up living in like a house in the middle of like nowhere in the Panhandle with like 0 EMF and lots of sun. And as a result of being in almost the middle of nowhere, I had like no friends and I didn't like do anything but go to the beach, jump in the cold tank, eat, fish, vegetables, meat, sort of paleo, almost carnivore, low carb type. And I felt awful. I felt purposeless, directionless. I didn't feel like I didn't know what I didn't have, but I was not happy. And I eventually said, well, I've got to do something with my life. I'm not I'm not happy here. So I tried to go back to academia. And I had seen what happened in the Northeast when Donald Trump got elected, and I concluded that too many people in the Northeast had effectively lost their ever-loving minds for me to live there and feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
That was even before COVID.
Wow. That's saying something.
They really overreacted to a New York real estate developer with a reality TV show and a bad hairdo getting elected president of the United States. I mean, we have checks, we have balances, we have Congress, we have Senate, we have House of Reps, we have Supreme Court. And then there's always the power of the people to like get out into the streets and make things happen.
Right.
And they were just like, the world is ending.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of white supremacists out there and I was like, you guys are nuts.
Yeah.
So I spent 3 or 4 years while I was into the quantum, because the quantum health space is really tough as a practitioner, because you're like, okay, I have like 3 tools in my toolbox. I'm going to tell them to get into the cold. I'm going to tell them to get out into the sun. I'm going to tell them to go wiggle their toes on the earth. I'm going to tell them to put everything in airplane mode and wear blue blockers and blah, 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 blah. And then that's it. That's
Right.
it. That's your whole therapeutic bag of tricks right there. And if that doesn't fix everyone,
I got to give a shout out to Carrie Bennett and Sarah Kleiner, though, because those are 2 of the people in the quantum wellness space that are like you, that get it.
Yeah.
It's not just those 3 things. There's so much more to it. But yes.
Oh my
go
gosh,
ahead.
yes.
Yeah.
But how do you build a practice around that?
Right.
You don't. So anyway, I tried to go back to academia. I didn't want to go back to the Northeast. I decided that I was going to do a fellowship in Mississippi. And people were like, wait a minute, you're a New York City born and bred, like UVA trained physician. And people in Mississippi, when I told them I was originally from Virginia and New York, they were like, why are you here? And what was funny about that to me is I was like, you people don't understand. It's 2019 and I already know that the East Coast and the Northeast have pretty much lost their minds. And I would say I like Mississippi because it's so backwards, it's forwards.
Mm-hmm.
Men are still men, women are still women, the sky is still blue. You're still supposed to work for a living. You know, you don't expect like people to just give you stuff for free.
But then people are also really kind, will give you the shirt off their back.
Oh my gosh, they're the most wonderful people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And part of that perspective was born out of the fact that while I was in the quantum paradigm, in order to pay my bills, I became a traveling doctor. So I worked in Bemidji, Minnesota, Deer River, Minnesota, Florence, Alabama, Parkersburg, West Virginia. I worked in places where they could not pay anyone to live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a general internist in general makes like 200 to 300 grand a year. These hospitals were happy to pay you $350, $400, $500,000 a year if you'd cover like night shift to live there and be their doctor.
Mm.
And these places were so bad, so economically depressed, so devoid of young people and community and economic opportunity that they couldn't find doctors to work these hospitals. And that was really transformational for me because I had never really lived in these places. I'd lived around them. Like Charlottesville is just this kind of enclave of, you know, really smart, you know, progressive, well-educated, wealthy people in Appalachia, which is, you know, an economically depressed, difficult, tough place. But the people in Charlottesville have no idea what it's like to actually live in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea. And when I actually lived around these people, I was really humbled by their spirit, by how they were, by their philosophy of life. And I was also really moved with compassion for the fact that they've really been badly treated.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be contaminated with C8, like in Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Right.
They don't want to be poisoned by, you know, mine tailings in West Virginia. They don't want all their jobs to be offshored so that everyone can be on unemployment or learn to code or sell solar panels or whatever. And yet they kind of like don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I went to Mississippi, tried to make an allergy fellowship work. And about 2 months into that, I was like, oh my gosh, I am learning more and more about things like sublingual immunotherapy. And it's apparent to me that this entire paradigm of allergy and immunology is based on completely flawed diagnostics, completely flawed therapeutics. And worst of all, the only reason they recommend injectable immunotherapy over sublingual is that it's been grandfathered in by the FDA because it was the original treatment for allergies, when in fact sublingual immunotherapy is non-inferior and arguably safer.
What is that? I actually don't know.
So the
what it
difference
is.
between allergy injectable immunotherapy,
Know what that is?
yeah, and sublingual immunotherapy is you just take the same antigens, you dilute them, not to a homeopathic preparation, but you dilute them and then you put them under the tongue, sublingual, and you get the same effect. And there's actually a clinic in Wisconsin that I briefly tried to work at, and I can't remember what it's called. It's in La Crosse. I think it's like La Crosse Allergy. And they went sublingual and started charging cash instead of taking insurance. And their injectable immunotherapy practice completely dried up and disappeared.
Wow.
But all over the country, everyone's doing injectable still because they make more money on it because it's covered by insurance.
Got it.
Which is actually crazy because when you step back and you look at the business side of it, La Crosse Allergy is doing it right. They're running a cash-only business, and they just say to everyone, hey, we don't offer this anymore because everyone's happier to pay cash for this. And when I interviewed with them, they said, yeah, we've got people flying in from like Japan to do this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you do? Why am I in a training program where they're paying me like $50-something thousand a year and I'm being trained to do therapeutics that nobody wants? Like they accept them because it's the only option and it's presented as the only option, but it's not. And it seems like, and Tom Platzmill said this to me, he's like, I'll train you to be a clinical allergist in 6 weeks. And that was how I felt after like 6 weeks of fellowship. I was like, really, I'm going to sit here for 2 more years, do this kind of like indentured servitude thing. I just said, and then I did not like someone at the program who will remain nameless for reasons that I've already mentioned, like things have come up with mentors, just bad dynamics. So I quit and I said, okay, I'm going to go look for another American Academy of Environmental Medicine member. I went back to my hometown, Richmond, Virginia, found someone there. And I thought that they would have the referral for me and that I'd be able to build a practice and be happy. And I got into the practice and there was like no referral and I was making like no money. And I was working, I would fly to Minnesota for my traveling job on Sunday. I would work Monday through Sunday. I would fly home on Monday. I would work Tuesday through Friday. I would take Saturday off. I would fly back to Minnesota on Sunday. I did that for 9 months.
Jeez.
And at the end of 9 months, my job in Virginia was maybe getting me like $10,000 a month, which is a lot in relative terms. But when you're like, oh, I don't know where the next patient's coming from. And I had experiences at that practice that really kind of blew my mind. I had a patient who came in, like, for example, for headaches, and she had one visit with me and her headaches were gone.
What did you do? What did you recommend?
Blue blockers, avoid gluten and dairy, take some magnesium. That's it. And she was like, I'll let you know when I need a follow-up. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so good that I don't know how to, like, I'm so good. Have you ever heard of the Curse of the Zamboni? Not Zamboni, it's the ice machine. I think it's the Zamboni machine.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of what happened to that company? They went out of business. Do you know why?
Why?
Because they created such a good product that it never fails. And so there was a period of time when the United States ice rinks were just proliferating everywhere, right? But that went on like a curve, kind of like this, right? It ramped up slowly and then it went vertical. And that was when the time for the Zamboni company was good. But then there's only so many ice rinks, there's only so many people, and there's only so much population growth.
And if it's too good, you don't need to get a new one ever.
And they went out of business because there was no ongoing maintenance and there were no more Zambonis to be sold. And I was looking at this and I was like, oh my gosh, like maybe if I see thousands and thousands and thousands of people, I'll get enough word of mouth referral that I'll be able to like eat. But otherwise, I don't know how to build a practice. I had no idea what to do. So I ended up going out and finding yet another mentor who sold me his coaching program. And he taught me sort of a new way of doing things. It was a hybrid way of doing things. And I really loved the paradigm. I loved what he had to teach me. It was life-changing. It was transformational. It was an incredible experience. And I moved to Florida to work with him. And then we had a falling out when I started to look into like relational dynamics and, personality disorders and boundaries and, mind-body medicine and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work as a long-term partnership for me. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Real quick on that, because this seems to have been a recurring theme for you up to this point. What was it?
Only like 5 times.
Yeah, right. So what was it about you that was attracting that? Like what had you not healed in your your youth that was attracting something like that, either subconsciously or on some level that you weren't aware of?
I mean, I think you already know the answer to that.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. You know that people are not attracted to what's good for them. They're attracted to what's comfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I say comfortable, I'm not talking about comfortable like a nice chair.
They're accustomed to.
You're like, I only sit in hard chairs. It's not because they're comfortable. It's because it's all you know and it's what you're used to.
That makes sense. Okay, I see what you're saying now.
The relational dynamics that I wound up in therapeutics as a doctor, girlfriends, dating, my friends, were what I learned at home.
Right. Okay. That's kind of what I was getting at. It was the same with me. Yeah. So,
I know.
Yeah.
And then I started to incorporate that. So then I had my own practice because his was a training program that I set up my own practice and did very well under. But then here's part of why I split from him is I didn't think his paradigm was workable with integrity financially. Because it's very much the standard operating procedure right now in functional medicine. Actually, it's more and more the mainstream, which is basically you go to a functional medicine practitioner, they say, hey, like I've got a $2,000, $10,000, $15,000 program. It's this many months. It's this much lab testing. It's this many supplements. It's this much clinical time or whatever. And I love that model because I really care. And when you operate on that model with integrity and empathy, you can over deliver to people who don't get great results. And then the people who do super well don't bug you because you got them better. But I ended up continuing to over deliver to people for a long time, which burned me out without necessarily giving me any like significant increase in income. Not that, I was doing fine, but I was also, it's like patients 9 to 5, emails 7 to 9, collapse into bed, get up, do it all over again. And then try and fill your compassion tank back up because I have a lot of empathy. I really care. And the more you care, the more tough cases take out of you. And so then it was like, oh, well, okay, now I got to charge more so I have more time to recharge so that I can handle the intensity and the acuity of the cases I'm getting. So anyway, I really couldn't stand that model, went into a membership model, didn't price it right. It was very challenging, tried to build a team. I love my team and I have a really, really great team, but I haven't like done it well as a business owner. I mean, it's way better now and it's only getting better and better and better and better. But where I'm going with that is I realized I really disliked the way functional medicine was being done in like a economic way. Partly because it was really facilitating narcissists and psychopaths coming in and just ruthlessly taking advantage of people. I mean, closing people on like $9,000 programs that were really derivative. And when people, and I actually had this experience in I then joined like a business coaching group recently, and they were like, oh, just do that. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, you did not understand this on your sales call with me where I signed up for this. I've already done this. And I have actually special snowflakes coming to my practice. They're flying in from South Africa and Mexico and Europe and, as far west as Washington and California. They already saw their local functional medicine doctor. He already sold them a 6-month program. He didn't get the job done. I don't need more sales and marketing training. I need you to help me set up a practice that actually works for them.
Yeah.
Because what I saw happening was people will do these big programs and some of them get results and some of them don't. But for the most part, none of them get the real training in how to think to become a healthy person.
This brings up what I told you before we started
Yes.
recording. And I've said this on a number of episodes,
Yes.
that I have a problem with functional medicine because I think it's actually incredibly dysfunctional, overwhelmingly.
You're totally
and it depends
right.
on what we'll get to your perception of it and what maybe true functional medicine is supposed to be. But my perception of it's almost in some ways worse than allopathic medicine. And here's why. Because it's being sold as something holistic, something more natural.
Yeah.
But it's doing the exact same thing that allopathic medicine does, sometimes just without insurance. So clients are paying out of pocket.
Yep.
They've been burned by allopathic medicine. So they're like, oh, I need to now go adopt this natural approach.
Yeah.
Then they end up getting some very non-specific lab tests done, some blood work done that's only a snapshot.
Which may be a completely crap test.
That's my point. And that's what I'm getting at. And oftentimes, in my experience, because we literally have had this happen with our son with some functional medicine doctors a few years ago, that you, just like you said, end up getting like a ton of supplements just treating the symptoms based on some lab tests that are only a snapshot in time, because we'll get into hair and mineral analysis and things like this. But my point is that it's just a green version of allopathic medicine where you're just treating or suppressing the symptoms with a bunch of supplements rather than actually addressing the root cause. And then you're extracting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from these patients who think that, oh, this must be the right thing to do because this allopathic medicine thing is bad.
And now they've been burned by allopathic medicine and they've been burned by functional medicine.
Yeah.
And then they're really hopeless and really sad.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's typically when they find us. And what I realized though was that what works about and I basically, I'm still optimizing this very much so in the practice right now. But I realized that if I was just honest with people and I priced it fairly, they would still do a program. But my real goal was I'm going to judge my success based on our continuity. Because the truth is, people do not want a 12-week boot camp. What they want is a team of people they can rely upon no matter what happens in their life, who they can call and get access to, who help guide them through whatever they need to be guided through to get the results and the outcomes that they want. And so I said, okay, we're going to judge ourselves based on what is our retention rate. So I created continuity plans and memberships, because the other thing that would happen is somebody would come to me and they're like, I've been listening to all these podcasts for years. I wear blue blockers, and I would do a history and I would okay, I know this person does not need that much coaching. They really genuinely just need some labs. And then we're going to do some targeted supplements, and we're going to talk about whether or not something like, say, thyroid hormone or testosterone or other bioidentical hormones are right for them. And then we're going to have serious conversations about goals, and that's something that is so lost. I don't know how people practice medicine without talking to people about goals. Because it's just let me give you an example. And this has really happened. So had a young military officer come to me about my age. He's gassed after his workouts. He's not afraid he's going to fail his physical training test. Because he's going back on active duty. He's not afraid he's going to fail, which means he's an extremely fit guy. But he says, I don't have the stamina, I don't have the this, I don't have the that I used to have to retain information, learn new information, and just function. And I'm like, okay, this guy's done multiple coaching programs with different people, high quality, knows his stuff, blocks fake light at night, low EMF environment as much as he can with his job. He's unfortunately still in a position to take vaccines because he's in the military. And we have a hard conversation about, okay, here are the things in your labs that are abnormal. Here are the supplements that could help them. Here are the things you could do like thyroid hormone or testosterone that could help get you the results you want. So long as you understand that if you were to quit your job in the military and go do something else, you might not need to resort to all of this. And that's a really interesting conversation to have with people, because as a physician, there's a part of you that's like, well, maybe I should just tell them all to quit their night job, their job where they have to get vaccinated, their job but then you would have like no soldiers, sailors, Marines, police officers, whatever. Then you, of course, can play the game of like, well, yeah, but if they all quit, then no one will have to get vaccinated because we'll have to have, and you're like, okay, well, I don't know. Anyway, so I just lay out the options.
Yeah.
And we say in the practice often, we say there's no rules, there's just tools.
Mm-hmm.
People say things like, we should never take ashwagandha when you're under stress because it'll like ruin your whatever. It's like saying you should never use a reciprocating saw to chop some kind of piece of wood. Like, these are just tools.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take and offer the patient tools that you think are not going to hurt them in the long term while honoring what they view as their priority.
Right. So you're basically just doing an approach where you're meeting them where they're at.
Yes.
Yeah. That makes sense. So what you're getting at is, in his case, for example, you could say that
I could have said to him, you need a $9,000 6-month program with weekly coaching calls and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no.
But at the other end of that what I'm getting at is, because I've said this a number of times as well on the show, that I like to call myself a natural health maximalist, where like I recommend very few supplements as an example, like one of those being magnesium breakthrough from Biooptimizers. Mm-hmm. That's one that I do consistently recommend because I actually use it myself.
Sure.
But I overwhelmingly take the approach of just getting my health benefits from nature itself. Yes. And I know you have that same shared understanding, but in 100%. His case, it's like, I could tell him like, hey dude, just quit and get out of the EMF environment and then just have to figure it out. Or you could say, look, okay, here's some tools where we can make up for these deficiencies because according to your job, you're having to spend a lot of time in a high EMF environment. I know that's the case because I was in the military as well. You're getting vaccines, all of these things. So these are the tools that we're going to use to sort of meet you where you're at.
Yeah. Speaking of EMF in the military, we actually have a radar plane, another different patient, but radar plane operator.
Oh God. That's a lot.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't say you need a $9,000 program. I said, okay, let's do an initial eval. Let's go over your labs. Let's come up with a plan. And then you book time with me on my schedule as needed. And so the way we set up the practices is a membership fee, which is the same base price that covers the annual visit with me. They've got a couple of nurse visits that I need, frankly, so I can keep tabs on them and have someone following up with them to make sure that they're, progressing or doing well, get feedback, et cetera. And then, we have different tiers of membership on top of that, because I just was like totally nauseated by the idea of just pitching everyone some kind of 4-figure program. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I judge our success based on our retention rates, and 80 to 100% of people who go through an initial program of care with us renew. Mm-hmm. So I know they see the value in what we're doing, and they know that we show up to win for them. Mm-hmm. And we try to keep it, and that's another thing that it's so interesting. People are like, oh, well, you should charge more. I'm like, yeah, but what I really care about is the results. I would much rather work with somebody who has less money, who's going to get better results, without going like into the red as a business, than like just, because I had a guy, he was a hedge fund manager. We were at the Palm Beach Grill. I was visiting a friend. And he said, you should move to Palm Beach and you should just charge like $30,000 a year per person and make it all inclusive and be a concierge doctor. Number one, I don't like getting up out of bed in the middle of the night. My experience taking care of people who are willing to put that much money into their healthcare is that they're extremely high maintenance and they don't treat you well. They treat you like a servant. And I believe I'm a Christian, so I believe like service is part of the deal. I want to be a servant, but at the same time, they treat you badly. Mm-hmm. So I did not sign up for that. Because the other thing is, I can get these transformational results for people, and it's way more inspiring to me to work with somebody for a fraction of that big $30,000 ticket price and get them transformational results and have them go out and tell the world how to be healthy than to spend that time and energy for more money on somebody who's just going to, I don't know, A, not treat me very well, and B, not do anything with it except go out and like chase another several $1 million deal that they don't even need, So anyway, that's where my practice is now. And it's funny because I never wanted to start a practice. I never wanted to be a business owner. I did not want to learn anything about marketing. I wanted to learn nothing about sales. I wanted nothing to do with that. All I wanted to do was practice medicine and I wanted to be the best. I still do. And that means being just really sophisticated. And, I said to you at the beginning before we went on air, that Hippocrates, the father of medicine in the West, said, physicians are many in title, but few in reality. And he also said the greatest medicine of all is teaching people how not to need it. And that is what I want to normalize and operationalize and turn into a movement and a juggernaut that transforms the world.
If you frequently tune into The Way Forward, you know that I strongly believe chronic and recurring stress is one of the leading causes of illness. And unfortunately, stress has become a commonplace experience for many of us in the modern world. Did you know that magnesium plays a crucial role in managing stress? It's essential for ensuring adequate hydration of your body's waters, regulating stress hormones like cortisol, balancing our nervous and hormonal systems, and producing the relaxing neurotransmitter GABA. Unfortunately, most magnesium supplements you'll find in health stores use only the 2 cheapest synthetic forms of magnesium. And since they're not full spectrum, they won't help with your magnesium deficiency or do much to support your health. There are actually 7 key forms of magnesium, and you must get all of them if you want to experience its calming, stress balancing effects. That's why I only recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. It's the only organic, full-spectrum magnesium supplement that includes 7 unique forms of magnesium for stress resilience, better sleep, and better hydration, all in one bottle. For those interested, you can try Magnesium Breakthrough with an exclusive offer. Just go to bioptimizers.com/Alec or head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10% on your order. So based on what you said earlier, the goal of your practice is to create patients who are healthy, right?
Yes.
And you had also said earlier that you want to, or how do I put this? You said something to the effect of that if people keep coming back, and I'm paraphrasing, so I could have completely get this wrong, that means that they're not actually healing. So how do you balance that out in your practice where people are coming back? As you said, you have an 80 to 100% return rate, but are they actually getting better through your practice? I think you get what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting better. It's about making sure that you are still well.
Got it.
And having access. Because here's the thing, right?
Touch points.
Well, let's just say that I had 1,000 patients who were so healthy that they never needed to call me.
Oh.
I was on the phone the other day, actually, with a physician's assistant who takes care of 500 people. They have his cell phone number, and they could wake him up anytime. They could bother him anytime. And he does like 6 to 8 visits a day. People go surfing. He lives on the East Coast of Florida. His name's Stephen Hartman, Ironwood Direct Primary Care. If you're in Brevard County, he might be the right person for you. Shout out to Stephen and his team. So, and he's doing this for like $79 a month. And I was like, how are you doing this? Because what people don't get is that if you give me the average American who says, I've got problem X and I want you to solve it, they don't understand that it may take hours and hours and hours of coaching and counseling and, detective work to figure out what's going wrong with them. Like we had a funny story recently this past week in the practice. Somebody we've been taking care of for a fairly long time, we discovered that they were eating like Cheerios and they wanted to lose weight. Newsflash for those of you trying to lose weight. Cheerios with milk is not part of that equation. Throw them out. Give them away. I don't care what you do with that, but that's not compatible with weight loss. And I'm like, man, we've been taking care of this guy for a long time. And either we didn't communicate it to him, or he didn't hear it, or he didn't follow through on it. And that's to a certain extent, that's on us. So if you go through a program with us and you get to the end of the program, and at some point in the future, I find out that you were eating Cheerios, or you were smoking cigarettes, or you were baking in artificial light at night, I'm going to go back to my team and be like, guys, what happened? And I actually created a series of forms where we actually ask all of the diet and lifestyle questions that could possibly move the needle, so that at the end of the day, if I'm looking at a case in retrospect, like, why didn't we win? Why didn't we get them where we wanted them to be? And my goal in a 3 to 6 month program is for them to get 50 to 90% better in that period of time. I think that's a pretty high bar. We have people coming in who've been struggling with their health for years, decades. That's extremely difficult to do with some of these people.
How do you measure the 50 to 90%?
Their words.
Their words, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to guess that, or ask if that was the case, because I appreciate it coming from their mouths rather than from like a panel or something like this. Like, no,
I
in
ask
my
it in
words, I
every
feel 50%
testimonial.
better. Yeah.
And I ask in the testimonial as well, what gets the credit for your improvement? And they divvy it up between all the things we do. You know, a conversation with our coach, Jim Laird, the group coaching, the supplements, the this, the that. And I do that because when I meet with people and I talk to them about what we do and why it works, I'm very clear with them that this is not an academic medical practice. We're not here to figure out, oh, well, you know, this thing does this and it works for this and we do it. No, this is you're here, you have a problem. We're going to throw the kitchen sink at it. We're going to give you information, protocols, you know, advice, recommendations, coaching, recommendations as quickly as possible to try and move the needle as much as possible in as short a period of time without cutting any corners, without cheating at all, without doing anything to undermine your long-term health and well-being, which is what a lot of functional and integrative medicine sadly winds up doing because they don't understand the foundational principles of health. Like a classic example is weight loss. If you take people and you calorie restrict them and you just flog them to death in a group coaching class with high intensity interval training, they will lose weight. They will lose weight. And what you're doing is you're burning a combination of bone, muscle, and fat. And that long-term is terrible for them metabolically, which is why you get all these sick, broken, obese people in these group coaching classes at gyms. And you're like, how long have you been doing group coaching? They're like, 20 years. And you're like, and you still look like this and you think this is your solution? That hurts, but it's true. Because at the end of the day, you know, you can make people lose weight for short periods of time, but sustained weight loss, just like any good thing, requires more discipline, more attention to detail, more focus, more resolution than quick fixes and gimmicks. It's the difference between getting rich quick and building something that's enduring and high integrity and profound and powerful. Not unlike, you know, I was talking about business earlier in functional and integrative medicine, right? Like I was comparing my stats to my colleagues and they might convert 40 to 50% of people in one of these super expensive programs into a continuity program. And we're doing 80 to 100%. That tells me that people are twice as happy or satisfied with our service as theirs. And so I sleep well at night.
Good.
Yeah.
You look like you sleep well at night.
But even if I had like 1,000 people who just called me when something went wrong, things still go wrong. They get hit by things, they fall down. As we age, I mean, 100% of people die. So something is going to show up that's going to take you out. Cancer, heart disease, stroke. And so you need someone to help you navigate those moments. And I actually spent a lot of time in medical school and residency in hospice and palliative care because there's something really profound about helping someone navigate the end of life. And it's actually always about, man, I'll tell you the amazing story about this. So this story was given to me by my mentor, Aubrey Knight, doctor at Carilion Roanoke in Southwest Virginia. He had this patient who was a nursing home patient. He was on what he described as doses of opiates that made him wonder if the DEA was going to show up at his door in the middle of the night. And he took care of this man for years. And finally, one day he asked him, is there anything, why are you in all this pain? And the man said, I left my wife and infant son years ago. And I reconciled with my ex-wife, but I still am not on good terms with my son. And Aubrey said, was there any way I can help you with that? And so Aubrey went out and got in touch with his son and had him come see his father. And his father apologized to him. And he died that night.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really not about how much life you have left. It's about what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are not around because they have something left to like accomplish. They're around because they have something left to atone for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of guiding people through the process of how do you really navigate your way out of an illness? What are you doing that's keeping you sick? What are you doing that's keeping you in pain? And that's why I got so deep into the psychology and mind-body medicine. You know, I had patients who would come back to me after, because what I would do on group coaching calls is I would coach them through what healthy relationships looked like, and I would give them background on what toxic behaviors looked like. You know, gaslighting, triangulating, flying monkeys, you name it. All this stuff out of the narcissist playbooks. And that I learned from Dr. Ramani's books and her interviews. Her YouTube channel is amazing. And I would have patients come back to me and they would say things like, you know, I broke up with my boyfriend and that was the last day I had a headache. Or all these problems that doctors diagnosed over the years as chronic Lyme, yeast, candida, Hashimoto's, they all disappeared when I got divorced. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Like we're missing, like, especially in the functional medicine space.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But also in the environmental medicine space, right?
Even a lot of terrain-based health approaches. I won't say that they discount emotions. I think they downplay the significance of emotions and unhealed trauma. And
yes, they pay lip service to it,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to have a lot of compassion for people in the integrative health space.
Mm-hmm.
If you identify as an integrative health practitioner, and I brand myself as functional, mostly because I'm trying to rescue people from the disaster that I see functional medicine becoming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least in many corners of the functional medicine world.
Yeah.
But what I really love is integrative medicine, because what we're trying to do with integrative medicine, that's why my podcast is called Integrative Medicine with Dr. Stillman, because I want to take the best of East and West, old and new, conventional, mainstream, alternative, however you want to brand it. I want to take all of it and answer the question, how do we operationalize this? How do we integrate these things into one cohesive framework that delivers superior clinical outcomes as efficiently and effectively as possible? And the lack of appetite for that kind of thinking in the medical world is truly shocking. People just are like, everything is mold. Everything is this. Everything is that.
Everything's a parasite infection.
You just haven't done enough HIIT workouts.
Right.
You just need to do more herbs. You just need to take another round of this. You just need more. And it's not that there isn't.
Don't you think most of those are talking even like a few levels up from looking at the foundations? Because that's what's been bleeding in the back of my mind, because you brought it up earlier. What is your approach on what are the foundational things that relate to every human being?
Here's where we're at now as a practice. We have such a huge body of knowledge to share with patients that we start them with what we call the 5 fundamentals, which are take 3 10-minute walks a day, drink high quality spring water, eat a protein at every meal, get the lights out at night, and have positive social connection. And Jim really came up with this. He's like, Leland, you're a doctor. You have no idea how difficult behavior change is for people. You have no idea how little bandwidth the average person has. And you have no idea how little your people are integrating what you're telling them into their actual day-to-day life. And then he showed me, because we would get on calls with people and they'd be like, hey, what about ashwagandha for my fatigue? And he'd be like, are you taking 3 10-minute walks? No. Are you eating a protein at every meal? No. Are you drinking high quality spring water? No. Do you have positive social connection? Are you getting the lights out at night and wearing blue blockers? No. Okay. Start there.
Like start there at the foundation first.
Yeah. And we would get, like I mentioned, our benchmark was like 50 to 90% is my goal for improvement in an initial program. And it's shocking how many people get that when they just do those 5 things. Now you get all kinds of weird questions like, I'm an oil rig operator in Alaska in January. How do I take 3 10-minute walks outside?
Right.
Okay. It's negative 40 degrees. Take 3 10-minute walks down the hall and get a therapeutic like SAD lamp and put it next to a to a red infrared light therapy panel, turn those on for 10 minutes, 3 times a day. We just made that up on the spot, right? So we start them there, and then we build on that foundation, and we're constantly going back to audit and make sure that they're still doing the things that we know are foundational. And whenever someone is not getting the results they want, we look for the problem that we didn't identify initially. And then we get after it. So that's the basic way that the coaching component of what we do is built. And we have courses and videos and all kinds of things. You know, like I created Dr. Stillman's Wellness Secrets, which is launching basically now, which is my like flagship course. It's for prosumers, people who are considering becoming practitioners, who are practitioners, or who are patients who feel like they've heard it all and they want to know what I really think in detail, or for practitioners who want to understand the way I set up the paradigm. So we have all that, and then I went through this journey with functional and integrative medicine with the lab testing, where, you know, I did so much testing. I did so much testing. Number one, a lot of the lab abnormalities that people have will normalize if they just do the basics.
And this is my problem with functional medicine.
Oh my gosh,
it's the avoidance, or at least omitting, whether lying by omission or unwittingly not telling them, like they just don't know any better.
I know.
But it's, oh, you have this result in a lab, therefore you need to make up for it with this supplement.
I'm telling you though, man, like I think I made probably like, I think we might make $1,000 on supplements every month in the practice. And for people to have understand that at scale, the average single practitioner in the functional integrative health space with a receptionist and maybe someone to help with admin could easily be, and seeing patients full time could easily be dragging down $250,000 in supplement sales a year.
Yeah.
And that's why it's gone so bad.
Right.
Because people are like, and this is something that I really caution patients on. Do we charge a premium for what we do? Yes, because we're going to over deliver, and we really judge ourselves based on our results more than anything. Because we know, and Jim Titt says this to me all the time. He's like, just take great care of people and you'll be fine. And so we judge ourselves based on those results, and we relentlessly pursue excellence. And so we make almost no money on supplements, but at the same time, we charge a premium, and people, as they get deeper and deeper into the practice, realize why we're doing that. Because it's way more, because we can't over deliver, and we can't be ruthlessly, seriously committed to results if we don't charge a premium. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
So we'd rather charge more for practitioner time and get better outcomes than make $250,000 a year on supplements and just be selling people things in bottles and pill bottles and whatever that fundamentally they should be getting from food.
Right.
And so we take the average person on like 10, 20, 30 supplements, and we pare that list down to like 5 or 6, 2 to 3 times a day. And I always try to gauge where people are, because if people want to do things with a very minimalistic supplement regimen, we can do that. But I also have practiced without supplements, and I've practiced with them, and you do get results with supplements that I don't see people getting without them.
Okay. Which ones are you typically recommending, or is it specific to
this is how I got into hair tissue mineral analysis. So as I got through this journey of functional and integrative medicine, I did a lot of lab testing. And when I split from my last mentor, I said, okay, I am really curious about hair tissue testing. I've heard a lot about it. I don't know much about it. It's sort of the next frontier for testing for me. So I started to run these tests, and then I realized that I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. These tests were weird. They were all over the place. I had these crazy high values. Patients were asking me questions I didn't have answers to. I contacted Clark Engelbert, who runs Nutritional Analytics on Instagram. Great channel. Follow him. He does fantastic work over there. And I said, hey, would you take a look at these tests with me? So we sit down and we go over my tests and a couple patient tests. And he starts explaining to me all the ins and outs of hair testing. And I'm like, wow, this is really more sophisticated and more interesting and nuanced than I'd appreciated. And I started to do more and more testing. And then I had two cases that blew my mind. First, I had a patient I'd been taking care of for like 3 years, and we finally did a hair test, and her aluminum level was like 119.
Mm-hmm.
The scale on the hair test goes up to 4.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we go through all of her products, and it turned out there was a foil-based, natural, organic, free trade, cruelty-free, non-GMO, whatever product that was packed in aluminum foil.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, for all I know, this is poisoning you with aluminum, because she was chiropractor's wife, all organic, a $10,000 whole home filtration system. Like,
right.
She was motivated. She did all the things. And so we got rid of that, and her aluminum levels came down. I had another CEO who was doing a lot of energy drinks. His level was 139. To this day, that's the record in the practice.
I'm drinking out of aluminum.
I know you are.
I know.
You might stop.
Bad boy. I should probably stop.
So I was like, oh my gosh, I've never measured aluminum before. And Chris Exley,
very familiar.
Yeah. He
correct me if I'm wrong. He found a correlation between Alzheimer's patients by looking at cadavers and aluminum deposits in the brain.
Yes.
With Alzheimer's. So correlating aluminum deposits in the brain to Alzheimer's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's very clear that we're living in the aluminum age. The level of contamination in the environment is insane. Mm-hmm. It's not safe. It's a poison. It's just so mild. And this is one of the problems with people. Like, if something doesn't kill you fast enough and gruesomely enough, we just sort of
I'll finish this drink, then I'll be done.
Don't learn to be afraid of it, right? So people are like really concerned about lions and tigers and bears and guns and shark attacks. But they're like, oh, yeah, aluminum. Yeah, it's my pots and pans and my cans and all this other stuff.
Right.
So, and then I had a case that really blew my mind, which was a young lady who came in with myasthenia gravis. She recently recorded a testimonial with us. And myasthenia gravis is
I just covered that the last episode I recorded, which is so crazy.
She had it since 17, was up and down, got much worse with the COVID vaccine. And, she trained with the Applied Quantum Biology Collective, or the Quantum Biology Collective. They run an Applied Quantum Biology training program, which I'm a faculty member of.
Mm-hmm.
People want to learn more about that. You should interview Meredith. She'd be a great guest.
Okay, cool.
So, and Carrie's actually on their faculty.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Carrie is as well. And Dr. What's her name? There's another doctor that I'm thinking of that's on that faculty. Okay. I'll think of it later.
So, anyway, she'd gone through that training program. So I knew she already had her fundamentals in order. She was a physical therapist. We did a quick program where I just kind of made sure everything was in order. And I mean, she was dialed in. Like, I looked at her macros and her micronutrients and chronometer with very detailed data. And I said, you are the most dialed in person I think I've ever worked with. So you just need to do a NutriVal. She had a hair test from before with another practitioner that I looked at that looked totally unremarkable. And I actually use this as a teaching case because it's so profound. And like I said, her first hair test was unremarkable. And this is where it fools people. They have a test that's like low across the board or low here and there. There's no highs. And they think, oh, good, I don't have a lot of heavy metals. Or, I just need to take these supplements and I'll be fine. The hair does not work like that. And it is one of the most pernicious lies in the integrative health community that the hair is a poor judge of the health of the organism based on the mineral levels. You have to realize that the hair is not a waste product of the body. It is an expression of the body. You don't look at your hair the way you look at your urine or your feces or even your blood, right? You don't look at your, what you leave in the toilet and think, that's an expression of me.
Right.
Isn't that amazing? But you look at your hair in the mirror, you're like, that's me.
Yeah, that is like one of the ways that we express ourselves.
Yeah, and when you get sick and start falling apart, sure, what you leave in the toilet might look a little bit differently, but when people really freak out, it's because their hair looks different or it's leaving, falling out.
Really good point.
Yeah, so the hair is an expression of the body. And what you'll see, and I say this having run hundreds and hundreds of blood versus hair versus urine samples, is people will tend to hang on to things in the body like copper and iron that then don't make it out into the hair because the body doesn't have the energy to take that mineral from the blood and put it in the hair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we call the poor eliminator concept. So the people with the lowest levels of heavy metals in the hair actually have the highest total body burden. This leads people in the functional and integrative health space to say, oh, then it's not a good test. Stop. Think. It's a great test. You just found out that they're a terrible eliminator, a poor eliminator. That is a clinically useful piece of data.
But how do you come to that conclusion in every case? Because let's take, for example, someone who, I'm going to take an extreme example here. Someone who lives in the woods, only drinks out of glass, only uses like organic products that are coming from the freaking woods that they're making themselves.
Right. And
they express on those tests that they don't have high levels of heavy metals.
Yeah, that's a great question. Then you get into...
So you're taking it into context with what their environment is like.
Right.
You have to, I would assume, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You have to
make
make
sure... Because if you do it
sure...
without it, then you're looking at something you have no context for what
You have to make sure that first you have source control.
Okay, that makes sense.
So is there a source? And if there is, eliminate that empirically, even without data.
Before you continue on the hair tissue mineral analysis. So is your perspective of overwhelmingly blood work, feces samples, things like this, is that it's representing a snapshot in time at that moment, whereas the hair sort of shows longevity because the hair literally grows out of the head and it will express the accumulation of things over the course of time rather the snapshot moment in time.
100%.
Okay, because that's the same conclusion that I've come to when it comes to labs.
Yes.
When people say labs, that honestly can mean anything at this point. So like, what do you mean by that? But
Absolutely.
I've come to the conclusion that hair analysis is one of the most accurate forms of labs.
Yeah. And so anyway, let me get back to the story.
So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to
it's a great point. Those are all really important points. So she was already doing all the things. I looked at this hair test. She was a poor eliminator. I said, okay, so she probably, but I looked at her, then I got a NutriVal. This was before I transitioned all the way.
What is a NutriVal?
NutriVal Plasma is a test from Genova Diagnostics. It's a blood, minerals, and heavy metals panel plus an organic acid test, and I would run it with the plasma amino acids. So it's like the whammy jammy, the premier nutritional, functional medicine, nutritional lab test. And don't get me wrong, I actually love the NutriVal. I would still run it in every patient every quarter if it weren't for the fact that it's like, I don't know what their price point is now, but they keep raising them for obvious reasons. But basically it's like, if you don't have $2,000 a year to sink into just the NutriVal, then you can't run it serially. And if you're not going to do tests every quarter, you're really going to be limited in the outcomes that you can get. Because getting people well, particularly with supplements and nutrition, is a little bit like getting a car out of a ditch. It's actually pretty easy to get them out of the ditch. But if you don't get them all the way back on the road, they fall back in. And that's one reason why they hop from one doctor to another doctor to another doctor. And they get so burned out on what I call the therapeutic treadmill. So anyway, I looked at her NutriVal and I just said, your heavy metals in your blood are low, but I have this sneaking suspicion that you have high levels of heavy metals. And so we're going to do this protocol and then we're going to see what happens. And we got she then went through a series of detox reactions, lots of rashes, malaise, brain fog, fatigue. And we got her hair test back and she had 40x'd her aluminum level in her hair. She had tripled her mercury level in her hair. She had quadrupled her lead level in her hair. And I think it was like tripled her nickel. So her excretion of these things had, over 10x'd in some cases. And during that period of time, she'd really experienced a profound remission in her myasthenia gravis symptoms.
Wow.
She also came to me primarily for infertility. And over that period of time, then they got another test in December and she'd had her aluminum come down and other levels had improved, but she was still detoxing. Oh, and the other thing she pushed out was a ton of copper. Her copper went from like 1 to 6. And that's one reason why I'm so wary of people who are just like, take beef liver, eat lots of copper. These are really nuanced things. And we get people in the practice. I mean, I have someone literally on tape in a testimonial saying like a high copper protocol ruined my life.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why it bothers me when people just are like, you all just need this. You all just need that. Like, do you know everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why do you
everyone
presume
needs
to
this.
know what they all need?
Right.
What a bizarre notion.
Right.
So anyway, basically 18 months, she went from infertile, in and out of the hospital with myasthenia gravis flares, to total remission. Her first child was born on July 4th.
Amazing. America, July 4th.
I know, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, this is what's possible when people do all the things we teach them to do.
Mm. What protocol did you have her on, just out of curiosity? Because I could imagine people, I tend to get a lot of skeptical listeners, which is a good thing, right? They keep me in check. And they would be mad if I didn't ask this question. So what protocol did you have her on in that time frame where before the protocol, she had low levels of all these heavy metals?
Yes.
Then protocol, because I could see where someone might ask, well, could it be that whatever protocol you had her on had high levels of those things, and that's what led to the hair expressing high levels?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
But I very carefully curate all my supplements. And so I'm using them in dozens of people at the same time.
Got it.
So I guess it's possible that my supplements are contaminated at some point, but if they are, why doesn't it show up uniformly in the hair? And you could go into like this circular argument of like, well, maybe some of your patients are poor eliminators and that's why they're not eliminating. And it's like, okay, fine.
But nonetheless, she ended up getting better. She had these detox responses.
I'll make a promise to you. When I'm running a multi-million-dollar practice, I will take the time to test 100% of the products we use regularly for heavy metals.
I appreciate that.
And I'll let you know when we do that.
Okay.
Right now,
I had to ask that though.
Right now, my margin's not quite there.
Totally understandable. But the point is, the larger point is that wasn't expressing for these, which means that she's holding on to them, right? And then she does this protocol that it does include some supplements, which we got to answer the original question on which supplements you typically recommend. She then expresses them and is also expressing detoxification response at the same time, and then feels a ton better, fertile, and then has a kid.
Bingo.
Okay, got it. Okay, so, now the supplements. What supplements do you recommend?
This story goes back to the 1980s when hair testing became very easy to do, and it's still easy to do. One of the pioneers, Dr. Eck, I think it was Paul Eck. Don't quote me on that name, the first name. Dr. Eck started to measure hair testing, hair levels, and he made the logical conclusion that anyone would make, which is, oh, your hair copper's low, your hair zinc is low, let's give you zinc and copper. But what he found was paradoxical. He would give these doses of supplements and the hair wouldn't balance out. And he established ideals around young, fit athletes around college age in the Scottsdale, Phoenix, Arizona area. So, I have questions about whether or not that's an appropriate reference group for, say, like 65-year-old retirees in Florida, but that's another story, right?
Right.
But that's how he set the references. And then he said, okay, well, if this is what health looks like in the hair as the terrain of the body that we're testing, then why, when I give these minerals, don't they show up in the hair? And the reason is that the minerals all have these weird relationships. So for example, if you give someone high doses of zinc, you'll actually drop their sodium level in the hair. And if you give somebody like high doses of copper and manganese, you'll drive the levels of sodium up. And what he found was when you balance the ratios, more than just focusing on what's deficient in the hair, let's give that, which is what we call replacement theory. And this is where functional medicine completely falls apart. It also explains why they have such tremendous value and success in the first 3 to 6 months. Because if you take people who are genuinely malnourished, right, and you give them huge doses of minerals and vitamins that they haven't had for years, of course they're going to feel great. And they're going to have you on their podcasts and you're going to be the talk of the town, and people like the Clintons will be your patients, and you'll have your own like center for functional medicine and whatever, right? But you will not bat 1,000, and people will be like, hey, like, this is month 9 and my symptoms are back, or they're not continuing to improve. So what are we missing? And the replacement medicine toolbox falls apart at that point. Because what I would liken it to is it's like saying, okay, your car has like a bad something in the engine. We're going to replace that. And now the engine's going to run great. Okay, great. We just replaced this thing that was missing. But what if the wheels are not aligned? What if the, tire pressures are off? There's all these other things that come into play that are more about alignment and ratio than just like raw power.
Right.
And so you see this paradigm of replacement nutritional therapy falling apart long term. When you focus on balancing the minerals in the hair, what you're really focusing on is balancing energy production systems in the body, which is what explains the improvement in hair that you see between a combination of things like light therapy, Hello, LifeWave, red infrared light therapy, heliotherapy, all this stuff, right? Hello, wiggling your toes in the grass, earthing devices, PMF devices, right? That's what explains why those can shift the hair alone. Because I've had, at least anecdotally, some people come in from LifeWave who heard about me through LifeWave, who were using tons of patches, and they're already pushing out these massive quantities of heavy metals. And I wondered, well, how did this happen? Right? Well, logical conclusion. What are they doing differently from my other patients? They're using these patches. Anyway, so that's why the two approaches together work so well. And that's why we do so much coaching on the one hand, and then we use these supplement protocols. But the supplement protocols are highly complex. So I don't even remember what the protocol was that I put her on, but you're trying to balance all the minerals at the same time, which is like 20 different numbers. And so the protocols have a fair amount of nuance, and that's why
so you're tailored to the individual.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
And that's why Clark and I then created the HTMA Secrets course, and then we created HTMA Secrets course with coaching, and then we created the HTMA Practitioner Mastermind, where we just teach people the ins and outs of how to analyze the hair. And part of this all happened, or this happened because I realized if I could get the same, and I'm always my first patient. So I did my own hair tests. I followed Clark's advice with the protocols, and I was blown away. I was like, whoa, this is better focus, better mental clarity, better stability of my mood. And he pushed me to a dose of zinc I had never used clinically before. And that's when I started to suspect that prior mentors either were ignorant of this or they were sandbagging me because they knew that if they didn't give people this secret sauce up front, they could keep them as clients for longer and milk them for more. Yeah.
That sucks. You hope it's not the latter.
There's some really dysfunctional people out there in the health and wellness space. And I'll leave that at that.
Yeah.
So I was blown away and said, well, there's no way I'm going back to doing replacement therapy. I'm all in on hair tissue testing. And then I started to, I had a number of patients who wanted to do both. They wanted to do the functional medicine lab testing, organic acid, Nutraval, whatever, plus the hair testing. And I started to run them together head to head. And I found that my supplementation protocols for the hair were not missing anything that I was getting for the Nutraval or the organic acid test. And I said, wow, I just cut my lab testing cost by 75%, and I can get the same outcome. Wow. And I don't have to worry about the sample thawing in transit. I don't have to worry about the sample like going bad, or the blood's coagulated, or the tubes, whatever, or the phlebotomist is an idiot and did something wrong. I don't have to worry about any of that. You can't mess up a hair sample except by dyeing your hair too close to the sample, or not sending in enough hair, or arguably taking hair that's not near the root, because you do want it to be proximal to the scalp, like as close to the scalp as possible. So it revolutionized our testing. All of a sudden, people all over the world can get this testing, and all they have to do is DHL it to the lab in Arizona, Analytical Research Labs, founded by Dr. Eck, continued by his family, and we can get their results. So that was huge, because it just made what I did much more accessible to people. Because if you're talking about a difference in lab testing of like $2,000 a year, it's not that people might not be able to afford that for a little while. It's, are you supposed to do this year after year after year?
Right.
No, that's not accessible for the vast majority of people. So, or it's not financially sustainable, really, without some significant sacrifices.
Do you approach getting your patients' labs at the very beginning, or do you wait until they've tackled the 5 basic and other things?
It depends on their goals.
Okay.
And so if someone were to come to me and say, hey, I have absolutely no interest in lab testing, I have absolutely no interest in any of this stuff, I would say, you are not a good fit for the medical practice, because everything I could tell you to do, we could cover in a coaching call. And we have a totally different business called Stillman Wellness where we coach people.
Got it.
And we show them, we share with them different.
Your practice for wellness, essentially. Your approach for wellness.
Exactly. And it's all virtual. And it's group coaching calls, Q&As, webinars, a webinar library, all these different things and a lot of it is stuff that like people could take to their doctor and say, hey, you know, I would like to look at my iron levels because of a webinar I watched with Dr. Stillman. And then they can run the test, right? We really want to empower people to get the best care possible, no matter what that looks like. And a lot of what people are struggling with is how do I navigate the conventional system? And I've had people on coaching calls where they're like, look, my doctor is a knucklehead and thinks that I just need to increase my dose of levothyroxine. And I think this is a trash garbage drug that no one should take. And I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm like, totally get it. And they're like, Dr. Stillman, I can't come see you in person because I don't know, whatever.
Right.
What do I do? Okay. Where are you? I'm here. Okay. We're going to look up like direct primary care doctors in your area. And you're going to call them and interview them and tell them what you feel. And if they're reasonable, kind, good people, sign up with them. And you're done. I know.
I like that.
It's so like people get into a really bad place with how they approach the medical system because they're so mistreated. And it jaundices their view of how to engage with those teams. And in my view, there's really only one way to do it. And it's just constantly take the reasonable man tone. Hey, doc, you know, I understand that, you know, you think I should increase my levothyroxine dose, but in the past, that really hasn't worked for me. I was just wondering, could we try Armour instead? I respect your opinion. I understand this probably works for your other patients, but maybe I'm special. Humor me. Would you humor me?
Yeah.
What are they going to do? Be mad at you? If they're mad at you, fire them. Fire them, go online, Google direct primary care. The people who do direct primary care are very reasonable people. They don't know all the ins and outs of integrative, functional, natural medicine. They're going to probably overprescribe and whatever. But they're overwhelmingly, in my experience, they're very genuine, heartfelt, kind, caring practitioners who will humor you. They'll run your vitamin A level because you asked nicely or whatever.
What I see happen a lot, though, is like speaking of going to a primary care provider at all, period, is that we've been conditioned to believe that we need to do that first before knocking out the very, very simple daily, totally free things that we can do 100%. That I know you're very big on too. Like,
right. I
mean, even aside from the 5 things that you recommended, it's just putting your bare feet on the earth a couple times a day.
Yeah.
Standing in the sun first thing in the morning,
right.
Breathing deeply, feeling your feelings.
But to take this back to the question you asked me earlier about how do you approach lab testing, we actually have a really cool process for vetting new patients to make, because I had an experience where a patient left me a really nasty review online. And I was upset by this. And other people were like, you shouldn't feel guilty. Don't worry about it. That's their problem. And I thought, you know what? What if I had a medical practice where, because I've felt the feelings that she felt about other things. People who sold me coaching programs, people who sold me, you know, consultations, whatever, where I'm like, you know, they really took advantage of me. I feel like a schmuck. I feel like I got sold. I feel like I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, and I didn't matter after I was closed.
Right.
And I was locked into some contract. And I thought, I am going to engineer a practice where no one ever feels that way. Ever. And I committed to 100% patient satisfaction. And you know how you do that? You vet all of your patients and you politely but firmly say to anyone who's unreasonable, unrealistic, or downright delusional, I don't think we can help you achieve your goals. Or I don't think we can do it in the time frame or with the tools. So if somebody comes to me and is like, hi, I'm 85 years old and I want to operate like a 25-year-old and I want you to do it without drugs and peptides and supplements and biohacks, I'm going to be like, hey, you are delusional. I am not Jesus Christ. He's not around. Maybe when he gets back, your goals will be achievable. But in the meantime, I don't want you to join my practice with unrealistic expectations. So here's what I do think we can do for you. And here's what I think we can do for you in the time frame that you've outlined. And so when someone comes in and says, I feel like trash, I want to feel like $1 million in 3 to 6 months, I'm going to be straight up with them. You need our 6-month program. We're going to walk you through everything we know. We're in it to win it. The reputation of the practice is on the line. We're going to look under every rock and behind every door to find every conceivable problem that could possibly be holding you back from success. We're going to give you the best supplement protocols as fast as it's appropriate, because you can't do too many things at once. And you can't, this is another thing that gets lost in the functional medicine world. People have to respect that the body has its own timing, and you cannot bake a cake but so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to beat the icing into the batter, and they expect the cake to come out the same way. It doesn't work that way. You have to wait for the cake to rest, and then you put the icing on. And in the same way, they're like, well, I want it to happen faster. Okay. I want you to take your oven and I want you to put it on broil as hot as it can be. And then I want you to try and bake a cake and let me know how it turns out. It's not the same, is it, Alec?
No.
And so there has to be this respect for the fact that the body has a divine timing.
Mm-hmm.
And you are not in charge, and you have to kind of surrender that to the body.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have to double and triple down on falling in love with the process of becoming well.
Yeah.
You have to fall in love with your 3 10-minute walks. You have to fall in love with eating a protein at every meal. You have to fall in love with drinking high quality spring water. You have to fall in love with the process. That's the secret to success. Doesn't matter if you're talking about wellness, wealth building, making a car, hum in just the right way. It doesn't matter. You have to fall in love with the process.
Beautifully said.
Thanks.
Beautifully said. So I want to know your approach, or your understanding rather, of, let's start here first, because I have a few more questions that I want to ask. What is your understanding of terrain? What does that mean?
Oh man,
That's
such a great
big
question. It's such a great question, but I actually created my own major at Connecticut College in environmental health.
Really?
It didn't exist, but they had a program where you could create your own major if you had this, that, and the other person sign off on it. So I had multiple faculty advisors and I created it. And for me, environmental health was all about, how does the environment determine the health of the animals and humans on it? My honors thesis in college, was the public health effects of factory farming. And for me, the terrain is everything, right? And a lot of the time, clinically, what I'll relate it back to for patients, for clarity, I like to say that clarity is power. I got that from my friend and mentor, Richard Brooke. And it really stuck with me and resonated with me, because when you're clear on what's determining the outcome, then you can start to really figure out what you have to do to achieve results.
Right.
So
you have to know the cause and what is causing the effect in order to be able to treat the cause. Of course.
Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. What does that equation mean for all of life? It means that energy and matter are interconvertible, and anytime you change energy, you change matter, right? So the famous quote of, oh, matter is just light that's slowed down for long enough for you to touch it, taste it, feel it, throw it, eat it, whatever. So you have to, I look at everything as, okay, we're either working on the energy side of the equation or we're working on the matter side of the equation. And then within matter, you've got micronutrients like minerals and vitamins. And then you've got macronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, proteins. You've got things like toxins, heavy metals, mold toxins, petroleum toxins, all this stuff, right? And then you've got a deeper level than that, which is, and this is a question I have in the hair, because you see something strange in the hair. I had a case recently of a gentleman who's pushing copper out in his hair in a massive amount. And he had a truly low serum copper level. Now, maybe that's because it's a snapshot in time. And he usually has a high serum copper level or a normal serum copper level or whatever. But I have these questions about, for example, copper sulfate is known as bluestone. It's a blue mineral that's sprayed on our crops. Fun fact, every day, 62 milligrams of copper sulfate is sprayed on our food for every man, woman, and child on planet Earth.
Oh my goodness.
Let that sink in. Now consider the fact that a typical dietary copper intake per day, 1 milligram would be high, 3 milligrams would be exceptional.
Wow.
So something like 20 to 60x times the amount of copper that we normally ingest is being sprayed on our food, not just every year, every day. I got those statistics from like industry websites that talk about how much of it is produced and created and whatever. Funnily enough, I actually got it from a website. I can't remember exactly where, but it's like a GMO apologist website. They're talking
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, they're talking about how bad copper sulfate is as a pesticide, and they're like, "Oh, this is terrible. Instead, we should use glyphosate." And I'm like,
God,
you guys are completely missing the point, but okay.
So this isn't on, because you said our food, not USDA organic food at the least. And I know USDA organic has its problems, but not on organic food.
No, it's an organic pesticide.
Oh, this is an organic pesticide.
Bingo.
Dude, that's sketchy.
I know, right?
Wow.
Anyway, so he's pushing out this copper, and my question is, on a quantum level, how does the copper from the liver of a grass-fed, finished cow, how does the copper from their liver differ in terms of how the body can incorporate and use it from copper sulfate being sprayed to kill fungus on, grapes in Bordeaux?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how you would answer that question. I can't tell the difference on a hair test.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the big you'll see these big levels of things come out, manganese, copper, everything at different points. And you're like, where's this coming from? What is this? And you can't prove that it's an environmental toxin, but people get better when they push out these huge quantities of things that are known to be toxic, and then they get better, shockingly enough. So the logical conclusion is, well, this is correlation. Maybe this is causation. Now you'll also get the scenario where people are feeling way, way, way better, and their hair doesn't look any different, or they're not eliminating any heavy metals. And then the question is, okay, are we optimizing energy dynamics within the body with everything that we're doing so that they're pushing out all the toxins, the molds, the petroleum toxins, whatever, and we just don't capture those on the hair because it's not really possible.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I've come to, we'll say that for another time. I've come to a nuanced perspective on mold as an example, that I think overwhelmingly mold is not the issue. It's a symptom of the larger issue, in that mold is there to bioremediate. And if it's bioremediating toxic building materials, then those are going to be leached into the environment, and those are present alongside the mold. And it's not exactly the mold that's the issue, because oftentimes when people have mold issues, you go look at the house that they're living in, and it's incredibly toxic, made with toxic glues, toxic drywall. This was
one of the things that woke me up, because I was working, that first job I had out of residency was it's mold, it's Lyme, it's co-infections. And I got into the light world, and the thing I noticed at that practice was, in retrospect, the people who got the worst results were the most tech addicted.
Yes,
they were the young people who were coming in. They were eating organic. They were eating good food. They were, like not a single toxin in their whole medicine or bathroom cabinet. And yet they were coming into the practice, and what were they doing? They were on, at the time there were no wireless headphones, but I'm sure they're wireless now. Right. And they were on their cell phones, and they were on their laptops, and they never got outside, and they never exercised. Right. And then you would have these like 70-year-olds. Like I'll never forget this like 70-year-old rancher from New Mexico or Arizona or something. He'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he wanted, basically like to beat it. And he came in and he got amazing results. But he's wired deep, deep, deep down every day. What does a rancher do? They get up, they go outside, they check on their cows.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
What an amazing concept.
Right.
And what do they do all day? They're outside. They're doing physical labor. They're connected to the earth. They're not plugged into technology. They have normal social connection because they grew up in a time where not having social connection was not an option.
Right.
Or, you could say it is. You can be a hermit or a recluse or whatever, but, it was not normal for 90% of your social interaction to be digital like it is for many people today.
This describes my grandparents, actually. So, like, you go inside their house, and I hope they don't listen to this, but their house has mold in it. I think they would agree. Like there is definitely mold in their house for sure, which again is indicative of the toxic building materials decaying over time. But point being, they spend so much time outside, like insane amounts of time outside, and oftentimes barefoot outside. And they don't call it grounding. They're just like, I'm in my garden. Like they don't have a name for it.
I know.
But my point is, you look at them and you're like, wow, you are really healthy people. And what's also funny and frustrating is that they eat like shit. They don't really care about that, but they do grow a lot of their own food. So they but my point is, it's because they spend so much time outside.
Right. And that's why I created the system that I have for onboarding patients, where you cannot just like book a consult, or you can't book a program or a membership. You have to have a practice membership evaluation, which in the like functional medicine business space has turned into just a sales call.
Yeah.
But for us is like, are you a good fit for the practice? Because I'm not thinking
we want to know about you.
I'm not thinking about, are you going to be with me for 6 months?
Yeah.
I really thrive on long-term relationships with patients. My goal is to have like 200 people who I take amazing care of year after year, decade after decade, and there's no turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I expect them to need a lot of care. I would rather that they not. And that's the only way I would grow that patient panel. But, you know, what you said earlier of like, well, like how much care do they actually need? They don't. So all they have to do is pay the membership fee and have an annual check-in with me to make sure that they're on track and they're on target.
Got it.
And if they want labs, we'll get labs. If they don't want labs, that we won't get labs. I look at the labs as an opportunity to kind of check your math. Because, you know, for example, I mentioned to you earlier that Ben Greenfield's CEO, Caleb Applegate, gave us a testimonial recently, and I've been working with him for over a year now. He came to me because he identified some labs that he was concerned about on Inside Tracker. So many people come to me with that stuff, and they're like, hey, I got this lab. And I'm like, oh, could have gotten you that lab for like 1/10 of the price and gone over it with you. But be that as it may. And Ben sent him to me to go over, well, why is this out of range? And then we cleaned up his diet. We cleaned up his lifestyle. His labs are on their way back to optimal. But, you know, that kind of snuck up on him. It's not that he doesn't know that he needs to eat a healthy diet. It's not that he doesn't know that he needs to sauna. I mean, he was saunaing and working out, and he had a Spurdy vitamin D lamp and all of that. And a bag of chips. Just kidding. Before he met me. But there was some other things off, and we did a bunch of different tests, and we did a bunch of different changes, right? And we had to in order to get traction and actually reverse those labs. And the lab that was most markedly abnormal that I was most concerned about is the high sensitivity or cardiac CRP, which is our best validated marker for future risk of heart attack. Like that's a big benchmark, a very important benchmark for me for our success. We typically see that drop by 50 to 100% in the first 6 months to a year of working with someone, so long as they're engaged and they execute. And that's part of how I know what we're doing is working, even if I can't give you a clear answer as to, well, it was the glycine over there, or it was the lysine that we used over in that case.
It's cumulative lifestyle change, dietary change, etc.
Right.
Okay.
And a lot of it is, you know, in the practice membership evaluation is a conversation about what velocity do you want? Like, is your foot on fire and you want us to put it out in 3 to 6 months? Okay. We would like to be able to deploy 100% of the tools with the intensity that we think is appropriate. And, you know, if you want to take a more gradual, measured approach, then that's fine. But we are not going to pretend that we can get you those results with a 1-hour consult. Like we had a guy, this is crazy. This is part of why we have this process. He got on a discovery call with my staff member, Megan, who's lovely, wonderful, really kind, very empathetic, cries on the phone with patients all the time. And she's like, we have a process. You have to go through the process in order to become a member of the practice. And he says, all I hear coming out of your mouth right now is crap. What? I just want to do a hair tissue mineral analysis with Dr. Stillman and get some supplements.
Jeez.
People are nuts. And sadly, they've been conditioned into this mindset through the functional medicine industry of you just need a lab and consults.
Yeah.
Because if you mark your labs up by like 20 to 100%, or you then mark your supplements up, or you take a cut or whatever, even if you give a discount, you're still getting like a 30, 40% margin, right? And I'm not going to like be the pot and call the kettle black. We don't have 100% discount on our supplements. We don't have 100% discount on our lab tests. But the markup we have allows me to have some more administrative staff who then allow us to serve more people. So anyway, that mindset is so broken. And that's where a lot of high achievers, particularly who are new to the integrative health space, really waste a lot of time and money because they chase shiny objects and think they can throw money at their problems and make them go away. Because in many parts of their lives, like CEOs, business owners, people with significant net worth, they're kind of used to being able to throw money at problems and make them go away.
Yeah.
Like the car's broken. Okay. Personal assistant, take that to the dealership, pay it. Here's the MX, go. Your health does not work like that.
Right.
I actually came up with a great analogy for it the other day. Thinking that you can outsource your healthcare to someone else, like you would outsource a problem in a business or a problem with your house or a problem with your car, is like thinking you can outsource problems in your marriage or a business partnership to like a relationship coach or marriage counselor or some other professional or paraprofessional and get the same outcome.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, you have to be the one in the chair or on the couch doing the work with your partner, romantic or business or just friends, right? You have to be the one doing that work. You can't outsource that.
Right.
Right. And that means you're in this relationship with your body where your body's not giving you what you want. And you're like, well, let's throw money at the problem. It doesn't work like that. Like go try fixing marital problems by throwing money at your spouse. Let me know how that works out. Right. So that mindset is broken. When you draw that analogy, it's so obviously ridiculous that people are like, yeah, I guess I do need to show up and do the work and learn and integrate all these changes. But then I think they get bogged down in, like, we had an interesting case, high-powered, high-intensity lawyer, major metropolitan area, huge mercury levels, blood and hair. He did not want to engage with diet, lifestyle, and behavior change. I told him he should. I said he would get better results. Sure enough, he didn't do any of it. Like, any of it. He lives life at like 100 miles an hour. But he did chelation, and he did some of our supplement protocols, albeit inconsistently, and he got great results. He's super happy. But I didn't create this false expectation of, you just need a lab and consult with Dr. Stillman, and I'll get you all better.
Mm-hmm. Deep sleep, or in-REM sleep, is crucial for our body's daily rejuvenation, repair, and overall well-being. And unfortunately, most people fail to get enough of this essential phase of sleep. It's responsible for some pretty crucial functions, including daily rejuvenation and repair, regulating cravings, weight loss, hormone balance, boosting energy, and more. And if you're not getting enough deep sleep, you may struggle with some of the issues that I listed. There are several factors at play, including things like non-native EMF exposure, artificial light exposure, and circadian dysregulation. But another big reason for a lack of deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium plays a crucial role in our sleep, one of which is increasing gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response, and when you're deficient, you tend to have higher stress levels, which, as you can imagine, doesn't exactly help with sleep. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. Magnesium Breakthrough from Bioptimizers contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. The deep sleep benefits when you get all 7 forms of magnesium through Magnesium Breakthrough are really noticeable. And as I've shared before, I don't take a lot of supplements, nor do I promote a lot of supplements, but this is one supplement that my family is regularly using. And there's a reason that this is a best-selling product for Bioptimizers. For an exclusive offer, go to bioptimizers.com/Alec, or just head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10%. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will also make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. So for people who are interested in hair tissue mineral analysis, how do you find a good practitioner? How do you know where to go?
The hair tissue testing space has become kind of a mess, as a lot of it, the functional integrative medicine space has become, because testing is so sexy. And the thing is, you can run like an ad on Instagram or Facebook, and you can sell a hair tissue test and interpretation for $200, and you can basically make a 75% something margin on that. And then you can make a 30% margin or a 50% margin on the supplement. So you're making, and that's wholesale prices. If you own a lab, If you own the supplement company, 90% margin, 95% margin. So what people have done, because it's hard, employing practitioners is hard. My nurse practitioner just resigned, which is very sad. She's incredible. She's she's like a triple threat. She can do everything from hormones on the one hand to hair tissue mineral analysis to like actually counseling patients on diet and lifestyle all at the same time. I spent 18 months working with her, and now all of that value is gone indefinitely. So what this has taught business owners is don't invest in people, invest in products. Don't sell people, sell products. People will quit. People will get sick. People need benefits. People will sue you for everything from sexual harassment to, adverse working conditions and all the rest of it. So if you just sell products, you don't need to worry about people.
That's flawed though too.
What it does is it can create massive profit margins and profits and fortunes, but it doesn't create value.
Right.
And then the question is, do you care more about creating value or creating massive profits? So like, for example, I'm not going to use a specific, well, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and use a very specific example. Like Jesus did not amass a fortune over the course of his lifetime. He died, was executed, right? And yet he created huge value for people in teaching this philosophy of love and compassion and forgiveness and grace and how to be with one another to create massive prosperity, happiness, whatever you want to call it. So, what do you want to be remembered for? Right?
Right.
How do you want society to look at you? So anyway, anyone selling you testing, supplements, drugs, whatever without counseling is, if you don't know how to use those things, you're going to wind up becoming their product.
Right.
So people need to be aware of that. Because a lot of it is contextual. Like, for example, if somebody comes in, different people come in with the same test, doesn't matter what test it is, I'll explain to them, hey, here's how I would handle this situation, but what's your appetite or what's your desire for how you're treated? Like one of them may be like, well, I'm ready to quit my job and go live on the beach in rural Costa Rica and eat carnivore or paleo or whatever I have to do, and I'd rather not take supplements or do weird biohacks or whatever. And another person may be like, well, I'm all on board with supplements and biohacks, and I'm not going to quit living in my high rise in downtown Chicago. Very different people.
Right.
So that's all goes along with that, meeting people where they're at. So I think it's really important to work with a practitioner who's going to take the time to understand your case. Clark, for example, who I work with in the hair tissue mineral analysis course that we created, he spends, I think, 90 minutes with people to go over the hair test and the lifestyle changes and the supplements and the diet and everything. And then there's a little bit of ongoing support after that, and we have a similar model, but I have coaches, so we have more touch. And so that's what I would look for, is someone who has this appreciation. We have practitioners who we've trained. We don't have like a database of them. I'm trying to find someone. Amy.
That's us. We have a database.
You do?
Of practitioners, yeah.
Oh, that's great. But I would look for somebody who's not practicing replacement therapy. And if you ask them, do you practice replacement therapy? Then if they don't know what that means, they don't know the difference between replacement therapy and real hair tissue mineral balancing or nutritional balancing, a la Dr. Eck. And that for me would be a red flag, because what will tend to happen is they'll just replace the levels and they won't get clinical results past like, oh, you gave someone magnesium, they got all better, whoopity-doo-da-day. Like you could throw magnesium at the average person in America and make them feel better. You don't need a degree for that, much less a test. So that would be number one. And then you have a practitioner database. I actually want to make sure that our practitioners get into your database.
Amazing.
Because we don't have that. And that would be a huge synergy.
Yeah.
Because we train them and we want them to be really good. And we care about that because unfortunately the reputation of hair testing is being, what's the word I'm looking for? It's being besmirched by the fact that people are selling the test and then selling replacement therapy and making a killing. And then patients may feel better for 3 to 6 months, but then it stops working and they think, oh, this wasn't for me, or this is, placebo, or this is just snake oil. And that's not fair, because the other thing is the hair changes and people have this idea of, oh, and this blows my mind, but people will come in and they'll be like, I saw this doctor a year ago and he put me on these supplements and I'm still taking them. And I'm like, really? Like, I took a left at a stoplight, 6 hours ago, and I'm still turning left. This makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
You need to iterate your protocols based on what's going on clinically. Taking the same supplements for an indefinite period of time is like turning your wheel to the left and just stepping on the gas.
Right.
You're going to go in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to the analogy of getting the car out of the ditch, it's like sometimes you lean on the left and sometimes the right, and sometimes you push harder and sometimes you kind of slow it down. And if you're in the driver's seat, you might hit the brake and you might hit the gas, but not too hard. It takes adjustment, and that takes being in relationship with someone who's really got skin in your game and who cares about you and has genuine empathy and is really focused on and has experience with adjusting things, making adjustments on the fly in real time. That was also why, I just couldn't stand what a lot of the older generation of integrative natural medical doctors fell into in their practice, because what would happen is they would get really good and then they would get really famous and then they'd be booking out 6 months to a year, and they would be crazy high prices that no one could afford to be a patient more than 1 or 2 visits a year. And you can't really get people transformational results easily in 1 or 2 visits a year. You're going to fail a lot more than if you have touch with them, if you have coaching, if you integrate that model. So I just said, there's no way I can be someone's doctor if I can't see them on relatively short notice. So I try to only book out 3 or 4 weeks. I try to have a couple slots in the day where if someone wants to talk to me for just 15 minutes, they can book it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, those are the things I would look for in a practitioner. They know what replacement therapy is and they don't practice it. They trained with someone who knows Dr. Eck's work, Dr. Wilson's work. Wilson, in many respects, took up the torch from Eck. Or they've trained with us, because we make sure people are really well grounded in those principles and they're using the protocols that have been tried, true, tested across at this point, generations of clinicians, because that started in the 80s. So X, passed on. And since then, almost or arguably 50 years or so has elapsed. That's a whole clinical lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of people who've done this and seen it work over and over again. And Clark's story is really incredible. He spent something like 50 grand on his health before he found mineral and nutritional balancing. And that's why he became a practitioner himself, because it transformed his life. He was on benzos and all kinds of drugs and was having crippling panic attacks. And this was the thing that pulled him out of that deep, dark hole and got him his life back. And now he's doing great.
I have a question on labs, because it kind of relates to mineral balancing. So how were the, quote, optimal levels of various minerals and other markers established in the first place? Who determined and how was it determined that these were, quote, optimal levels? So
I alluded to that earlier. Eck tested levels in healthy young athletes in the
Okay, so
scale.
yeah, that was the healthy young athletes
Yeah,
thing.
so that's how he established them. And then you could get into questions like, well, because there are nuances here, Chris Shades made me aware that not all mercury is eliminated in the hair in the same way. Some of it's not going to be expressed there.
Yeah.
And if, for example, you actually put a real chelator into the body, it's going to grab the mercury. That mercury is not going to get out into the hair.
Mm-hmm.
So, you could go through chelation therapy, as a gentleman I alluded to earlier did, and got a great result, great outcome. But he had truly high mercury levels, which most people don't have in their blood. And by the way, I think the reason I brought that up is that he got worlds better with chelation. And the thing that triggered his health deteriorating significantly was actually a significant mold exposure. So you have this clear history of mold exposure, clear history of symptoms onset in a moldy building. But when we eliminated the heavy metals with chelation was when he got the biggest improvement in his symptoms.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why people, they really, and this
well, think about it. Well, think about that though. Again, these building materials, I'm not going to make the claim that all of them are including heavy metals to some degree, but if the mold is there doing the microscopic work that mold does to help bioremediate environment, it's leaching those, and then you're breathing that, and then people think it's the mold that's the issue. You think like people living in the woods amongst tons of black mold, especially in more humid, wet environments, they're not presenting with the same types of symptoms as people who are living amongst mold in buildings. So it could be that when the chelation was done for the heavy metals, it's the heavy metals that were the issue. It's just that the mold happened to be present there because it was bioremediating the toxic building materials.
Right. But all this goes back to the idea I shared earlier, which is the map is not the territory.
Totally.
So it's
I always try to figure out how things work.
I do too.
Yeah.
Because even though we know the map is not the territory, we're still incorrigibly tempted to make maps. Yeah. Because that's how we navigate our world, Well,
this is the reason I bring that up though. It's rather than so first off, I'm curious and trying to figure out how things work.
Oh yeah.
But I'm more concerned with people who make assertions, not you. I'm not referring to you whatsoever because you don't do this. I'm saying they make assertions on, just like you said, they make up stories. This is how this works for sure. I'm like, okay, I'm cool with you believing that so long as you don't develop protocols and then say everyone must do it this way because I know that what I've determined is correct. I'm like, for example, when it comes to mold, people develop mold specific protocols that don't end up helping people in the long term because again, it's not the mold that was the issue in the first place. And that's not always the case. I'm not saying no one gets better on mold protocols, but you get what I'm saying. It's
100%.
It's when other people make assertions regarding something. So I'm like, where is the proof for your claim? And I'm saying I'm falsifying that claim and I have no idea what the fuck it is after that.
Do you want to know what I think the 5 most dangerous words in the English language are together?
What?
How do you know that?
I love those questions.
If you want to piss people off, ask them that.
Yeah. You know who's the best at asking that?
Who?
Andy Kaufman.
I'm not surprised.
The very best.
I'm not surprised.
Like even in casual conversation with someone.
I know.
Like where I would just let it go to be like, okay, I know that's not correct, but I'm just going to let it go. Andy's like, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, fuck Andy. Like,
you know what I want to see?
It's the best though. Everyone needs an Andy Kaufman in their life, especially because he is freaking like he is so smart.
I know.
I hope he doesn't listen to this because I don't want to gas him up, but he is so smart. So smart, man.
I know. But you can also, I don't know. I like I said earlier, I would love to pick him and Tom Cowan's brain.
Yeah.
Because some of what they've said, their map doesn't line up with my experience. Like for example, I've had these incredible testimonials from patients on how much better they feel with the vitamin C that we use in the practice. And I remember maybe a year ago, Dr. Kaufman was publishing things about like, well, is vitamin C even what we think it is? You alluded to this when you talked about how vitamins were discovered. And I'm like, okay, hang on a minute. Like, I've got like this incredible therapeutic over here that's getting these crazy, incredible over the top results for some of my patients. And then I got people telling me over here that it's just a white powder with no basis in like a therapeutic reality. My experience of the world, the territory over here, is not lining up with their map. So are we talking about the same territory or is something else going on here?
Yeah. And it could be that, for example, with this case of vitamin C, it's that, and I haven't looked into this. I did not watch that video from Andy, but I'm just speculating here.
Sure.
Could be that he is correct in that this is not vitamin C, quote, vitamin C. This is not the naturally occurring constituents inside foods that are alleged to contain, quote, vitamin C. Yeah. This is something else, but maybe, and again, I haven't watched the video, so I don't know. Maybe it's that does not mean that they don't produce positive results in some respects. It's just like then becomes a nomenclature issue. Is that actually, quote, vitamin C, right? Or is this substance in food the same thing as this, quote, isolated vitamin?
I know.
That's kind of what.
And that's why how do you know that is such a like.
I love that question.
It's such a deadly question.
Where's the proof for your claim? I mean, that's a maxim of law though, right? Like the burden of proof lies on the individual making the positive claim. And that's where I have come to the perspective that if you just clarify, I believe this to be true, I'm totally cool with that.
Or like, this has been my experience.
Yeah, this has been my experience.
I had a patient once though get mad at me.
Really?
She was basically like, you don't tell me exactly what to do. And I don't understand why you always say things like, well, in my practice or in my experience or what I've seen in my patients.
I love that though.
And I was like, you just don't get it. Like, this is not, you're not a car.
No, exactly.
I can't just be like, oh, that's the problem with the manifold.
Right.
We got to change the spark plugs in you, girl.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, she's not a patient anymore.
Oh, I couldn't imagine why. I want to get into some other topics though, especially because we're going pretty long here.
Sure.
And I really want to cover these. So in your experience, what have you come to understand about the interplay between non-native EMFs and heavy metals?
This is such a fun story. All right. Early in my career, in my own practice, I get this call from a guy. I can't make this up. He's worried about his ankle bracelet that he's wearing because he's under indictment for like massive fraud. And he's worried about the non-native EMF from his ankle bracelet because it has like a GPS transponder on it or whatever. And
his question, not wrong there, so.
His question to me was basically like, how do I mitigate the non-native EMF from my ankle bracelet? And I'm like, all the questions I never thought I would get as a doctor, I don't even know what to do with this. And he's telling me I can't sleep, I'm tired, I'm this, I'm that, I have racing thoughts, I'm worried it's the non-native EMF. This was when I was early in the functional medicine testing game. Ran his blood minerals plus blood heavy metals. He had a crazy level of mercury. Like double what I would be concerned with, at the level where in case reports in the literature, you do see people having symptoms. And I said, what's going on here? He fell down the Jack Cruz rabbit hole and he thought it was a good idea to eat a pound of fish a day and that the selenium in the fish would just counteract the effects of the mercury.
Wow. Replacement.
How's that working out for y'all who are still out there doing that? So I ended up telling him to completely cut out. I mean, a pound of fish a day is a lot. That's the most anyone in the practice has ever come in with. We've had one guy in the last year who came in with a fish oil level that was optimal without fish oil supplements. He loved his, high-end fine dining fish dishes. He needed to stop. His mercury level dropped by like 50% in 3 months. And his Graves' disease went completely into remission with a couple of other medications and supplements and stuff like that. He also did no lifestyle and diet changes. But anyway, so I said, look, no more fish. You need to go to some land animal meats. What people don't realize often about land animal meats, and that's part of why I think so many people feel so much better on the carnivore diet, is when you go high on your red meats, you massively increase your zinc to copper ratio in your diet. And this can be life-changing for certain patterns in the hair mineral that you can identify with that test. And, if you're badly zinc deficient and or you've got copper toxicity, which you'll see in the hair as well, then no wonder you feel better. So we pivoted him away from that sort of like Epipaleo RX diet and into this low mercury diet with only the smash fish, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring.
And then ruminants.
Yeah, and then lots of ruminants for the zinc, and supplemented him with magnesium. His magnesium was very low, and the trend you'll see is the higher the heavy metal burden, the lower the blood mineral levels, particularly zinc and magnesium. Whether you're talking about serum or RBC or WBC, doesn't matter. They're all going to tend to correlate and associate like that. But for the record, I also find them to be, particularly with most labs, they're not reliable enough for you to really trust them. There's so much noise in labs that people make huge therapeutic mistakes because they don't understand how much they can vary. Like I did this in myself as a case in point. I ran my own blood labs, what I call our comprehensive wellness panel. I ran it like 5 times in 2 months. Same diet, same lifestyle, same exercise routine, same circadian rhythms, same bed, same house, same neighborhood, same everything. Wildly different numbers in many of the lab metrics. And that's why it blows my mind that people are like, oh, my TSH last year was high, so I increased my dose of thyroid hormone and I still don't feel better and I don't know why. We test labs quarterly until they're optimal or until the patient says, I feel good, I'm ready to get back to my life. I'll come back when I need you. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
There's no need to do them further at that point, right? At least not for a while, maybe for a checkup.
Well, what's our goal?
Right.
What's our goal?
In most cases, I'm asking. Because from there, it can create at least I could imagine it creates the effect where you feel great. The perfect example is I feel fine, but I tested positive for COVID, and that means that I have this.
Sure.
Yeah.
But like, let's say that someone says, well, I mean, let's take a really extreme case. And frankly, I don't have anyone in the practice who falls into this bucket. Let's say that every marker they have that's ever been validated for good outcomes, long-term and longevity. Just throwing a few out there. Hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, high sensitivity CRP, omega-3 index, serum magnesium level, morning urinary pH. Shout out to my friend Russell Jaffe, who clued me into a lot of that. You would love him as a guest, and he would love your podcast, by the way. I would love to make the intro.
Hook it up.
You would have a really good time quizzing him on lab testing, because that's his jam. And also supplements, because that's also his jam.
Cool.
Let's say that you have somebody who's completely dialed in on those labs. How often are you going to recheck them to make sure that they're not drifting away from optimal? Now, I don't have some kind of, because you would think that if they don't change anything in their diet and their lifestyle and their environment and whatever, that they're going to remain the same. But who's actually that consistent? And how do you know that the HVAC system in your office didn't spring a leak or get too cold, or there was a spacing issue with, part of the ductwork, and now there's mold in the building and you have no idea because you're nose blind or whatever. So it becomes a system to, like I said earlier, check your math. How healthy do you really think you are? Because people will do this. Like, this came up with Caleb, Ben Greenfield's CEO. He said to me, basically, I just thought I'd gained a little weight and was a little out of shape and was just a little tired. No, you actually had significant elevations in an inflammatory marker that's linked to premature heart disease. And now we've cut your risk of heart disease from what it was in half. And I've had countless people come into the practice. They're like, I'm just a busy, stressed out, a little bit overweight, perimenopausal, say, woman, or, man going through andropause. And, all my friends are having the same experience. Sure, but I don't know if 50% of them or 10% of them or 1% of them have this lab abnormality. And in the end, it doesn't matter. Do you have it? And let's say that we do get someone completely dialed in. How often do they want to retest it? That ball's in their court.
Right.
And
what do you recommend, though?
I don't.
Okay.
I think that's like, I just don't. I don't have a strong, because when I come up with a recommendation, it's because I'm correlating like, okay, you want to get here and you're here and you're asking me, should I do this to go from here to there as fast as I want? And, then I just share with you my experience. Right. I really like saying to patients, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to inform you of the likely consequences of your actions based on my experience.
I like that.
That's it.
This
is not a paternalistic relationship. In the sense that those relationships, that most therapeutic relationships are paternalistic of, you are a child, I am an adult, I'm going to tell you what to do.
Right.
And you should expect great results if you just do it.
Right.
So
let's finish up answering that question, though, regarding the EMF and the...
Yes. So his mercury level dropped through the roof. A lot of his symptoms went away. And so I think that overwhelmingly what I've seen in people who come in reporting electromagnetic hypersensitivity is that they have lower levels and imbalances in the nutritive minerals, nutritive elements, and they have higher burdens of heavy metals and other toxins. And that's part of why they're sensitive. And that's part of why people who are in like, quote unquote, good health, they don't sense these fields the same way that the electromagnetically sensitive do, because their systems are literally buffered to withstand that.
They have a strong, coherent field.
Yes. Their cellular water battery, their exclusion zone is intact. And so the EMF are not creating these massive problems. But as people drift away from optimal, they become more and more and more sensitive. And then they notice a bigger and bigger and bigger benefit to mitigating or even eliminating that field or that exposure.
That makes sense.
But people will run into a problem where they'll mitigate the EMF field and they won't correct the underlying terrain with the minerals and the vitamins and the macros and the this and the that, and also with their emotional environment, right?
That's a really good point.
And so then that leads me to make all these other questions. Like, for example, okay, if you go to a Joe Dispenza meditation and you or whatever, you engage in mind-body medicine in an intensive, immersive way, and you overcome all these diseases that I or other people may blame on mold, Lyme disease, this, that, the other thing. How were you able to overcome that only with the thoughts of your mind?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I cover in detail in a podcast I just dropped with my mentor and friend, Richard Brook, about his book, Mach 2 with Your Hair on Fire, which is my favorite, like, personal development. Actually, it's the book I would recommend to people if they want to really understand what's going on in mind-body medicine at a very basic, fundamental level. But you're controlling the neurotransmitters and hormones coming out of your endocrine glands and how your neurons are firing on a fundamental level by controlling your thoughts. And so your thoughts are going to create the terrain in and of themselves.
Right.
So if you're constantly bathing your cells in the wrong milieu of hormones and neurotransmitters, then your cells are going to tend to accumulate heavy metals and toxins and this and that and the other thing.
Right.
And thus, if you change that milieu by changing your thoughts, you will also then change how your cells handle those things and maybe get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you really wanted to test this rigorously, you would do things like you would take sick people and you would measure like hair, urine, feces for toxins, and you would keep them in a special environmental medical testing unit where all of that was collected. And you ran them through like mind-body medicine protocols and meditations and positive thinking and all the things. And you would just see how does changing the energy that's going into the system and the energy that they're cultivating within their internal environment, how does that change their excretion of these bad things and their retention of the nutritive minerals? And this is another thing that really hit me from the hair testing. People will not get better until you use enough of the right, in many cases, well, I'll say it this way. They'll see profound results when you add enough of the right mineral to drive out the heavy metal, because metals and minerals, they compete with one another. It's called ionic mimicry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have an enzyme that uses, say, a zinc atom at its active site, that could be competed for by aluminum or cadmium or another toxic metal. And until there's a zinc atom to replace that toxic metal, the toxic metal is not going to leave the enzyme. You're not going to see it in the hair. You're not going to see it in the urine. You're not going to see it in the feces. It's not going to be in the blood. It's going to be in the cell, ruining the cell.
Got it.
And that's where you have to understand. I'll use this analogy. I'll say, look, have you ever had an appliance in your house that didn't quite work right, but you didn't throw it out because it still worked good enough?
Mm-hmm.
And so think about your body that way. It's not expressing the heavy metals because they're currently stuck in active sites on enzymes, and your body's not going to throw it out until it's got that enzyme with the zinc in it so that it can ditch the enzyme that has the mercury or whatever. And so when you start driving these high doses of minerals into people, 2, 3, 4, I mean, you'll put people on minerals, and this is why the mineral balancing protocols have to be iterated. You cannot put people on high doses of minerals and continue to use them month after month. That's a recipe for absolute disaster. And that's another thing that people could use to vet their mineral analysis practitioner. How often do you retest or recommend retesting? If they say anything, the right answer is quarterly. I often have patients who are doing so well that they space it out to every 6 months, every year, but that's not what I recommend for best, fastest results. In fact, some of the people who languish the most in the practice are the people who don't realize that the expectations we set at the beginning, we're assuming that they would engage with the mineral analysis every quarter and be consistent with the supplements. That's part of why we do that vetting process.
Got it.
So that they're not disappointed that they don't make the progress we think they can make.
So I take it that for the overwhelming majority of the way you approach things, you're looking at balancing minerals as foundational before you start addressing, or maybe in tandem with, for example, if someone's dealing with electromagnetic sensitivity, right?
Yes.
you're looking first to see what minerals they have out of balance in conjunction with addressing the things in their environment that they can put in place to optimize their EMF environment.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's not, I mean, like, go watch an HGTV show about like house flipping.
Yep.
When they walk into the house, they're like, this has got to go, that's got to go. And then they're like, well, this is the priority.
Right.
And then there's an order of operations.
Right. That makes sense.
You don't like change the drapes before you rip out the flooring. Doesn't make any sense.
Like in here, you could easily come in and say, yeah, you need to get rid of these studio lights. You need to get rid of these RGB lights. You need to get rid of that.
No judgment here. Yeah. No judgment.
You know what I mean? Well, my point is, it's like, well,
Yeah.
the point of this is a studio,
I know.
right? So this is a studio. So what can we do to optimize that given the context?
Yeah.
And what is it about your internal environment rather than external environment that is making you a match for the resonance of this,
Right.
rather than you being the strong, coherent field that is not impacted by things like this? Okay. I like
100%.
that.
Totally agree.
I can get with that. Cool, man. Well, Leland, this was awesome, man. Thank you for joining me. Anything you want to share as we're closing up?
The medical practice is stillmanmd.com. Schedule a discovery call, then a practice membership evaluation. If it's a good fit, there's a variety of different options, programs, memberships, depending on what's appropriate for the person and what we work out on those calls. Stillman Wellness is where we do our coaching. So the HTMA practitioner course is there, HTMA Secrets. People who buy the course get access to the course plus coaching when it opens. We're running a cohort right now. 6 months from now, we're going to open enrollment back up, tentatively anyway. We're taking a little break. And so the people who've bought the course get first dibs on the course plus coaching, which is a weekly 1-hour call with Clark and I, access to all the webinars we've ever done, which are very in-depth and give you everything you need to know to really succeed as a hair tissue mineral analysis practitioner. And then you can join the mastermind after you've gone through that. If you're a practitioner already, you have a license, a certificate, some kind of chops as a practitioner, you can go straight into the mastermind. But we will not allow you to ask rookie questions that are covered in the modules out of respect for the people who've already gone through the process, right? And then once you're in the practitioner mastermind at a certain point, you can sit for a certification exam with Clark and I, where we will, if you have no certificate or you want a certificate from us in order to allow you to order labs and order supplements from the purveyors we recommend for hair tissue mineral analysis and hair tissue balancing, you can sit for that exam with Clark and I. And that's not really, it might sound like a big deal. It's not. We'll tell you when you're ready, and we'll make sure in the practitioner mastermind that you are ready before you sit for that exam. We just want to make sure that we are not a diploma mill, just pumping and dumping clowns out there into the world of integrative medicine to make things even worse than they already are.
Yeah, you're not trying to aid into the dysfunction of functional medicine.
Exactly.
You're trying to make it functional again.
Oh man. Yeah. Make functional medicine functional again.
I was just thinking the same thing. There's a hat. Man, okay. Thanks
that
for
would be a
me.
real niche hat.
That would be a real, like the people, like the overwhelming
five
majority of
people
people
would
would be
buy
like,
that.
what does that
5
even
people
mean?
would buy that, and like the people who got the joke would be your best friends.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I find someone out there wearing that hat, it's like, oh, you listen to this episode. That's
You know what's funny about that? I'll mention this too. If you're a practitioner and you are like at a loss for what to do in your career and you're contemplating all these different practitioner training programs and all these different, I see practitioners being horribly taken advantage of. So before you buy some $10,000, $100,000, whatever it is, program, course, boot camp, mastermind, just call me. You don't have my number, so get on my website, fill out the contact form. I'll get on a call with you for 15 minutes, no cost, give you some advice, give you some pointers, help you find the right place. I've wasted more money in the business development world than I am comfortable admitting to. And it's just been part of the journey though. And that's part of delivering a superior product that also becomes, more than like a business, but a real movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I care about way more than, our percent margin or our profit to earnings ratio or whatever. So
beautiful. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun. This is a great podcast. This has maybe been the best single interview I've ever done.
Wow. That's amazing. Like to cultivate that environment.
Absolutely. Well, that's
Yeah.
why you're the best. One of the
Thanks,
best.
bro. Thank
the
you.
top.